Al, before you get started tonight, I just did want to, by way of context, how we got here and what we're doing and when we're here. Was June 6th was the first time we had a proposal that we discussed and reviewed here, and then you came back to us on the 20th of June with some alternative proposals, and we narrowed the field down a little bit then. And we're going to review those tonight and any additional options that were presented, which is now known as the option 5. And so tonight, we're not making any final decision on any one option. That's consistent with what we've said all along, but it would be our hope to narrow the field perhaps even to one possibility. But we'll see where we go. So Al, I appreciate you again taking us through everything. It's all yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board, Dr. Hamlin, and guests. It is my pleasure to bring to you ultimately, which is the 4th update, if we go back to presenting to the County Board of Commissioners. For tonight's presentation, knowing that we have added an option, I know that we have new listeners who may be observing or paying attention to the meeting. So I will go over some slides, even though you as a board have seen them several times. I feel compelled to at least go through them with a little level of detail, knowing that possibly people who are in attendance or listening, it may be the first time, and I just don't want to give an impression that we are diminishing the value of those options by skimming over them. But I know that most of you have seen them and read them in detail. My disclaimer this evening is, as the team, as we've put this presentation together, and as you as a board removed some options in the past, and we've added an option because as a team we're continuing to try to meet the needs of the board, the Woolpert plan, as well as the community values. We integrated or introduced an option 5. As you look at the advantages and disadvantages, those iterations have changed over time because as you remove an option, the comparisons change. So my disclaimer is, we did to the best of our ability to try to be all-encompassing, but it's not limited to what you just see tonight. There could be other disadvantages and advantages, but we've done our best to be as inclusive as possible of those. But it's just one of those where it's a catch-up game and trying just to make sure that you're being objective in what you're showing, but you're also being inclusive of what the pros and cons are based upon the decision-making criteria that we've gathered and that we used at the last meeting. So for tonight's approach, first I just want to briefly go over the school district's approach with Orange County, talk briefly about Woolpert's recommendations, the community input that we've received, the bond plan options is where I will look at the options that are in play, and then go over the decision-making values and criteria. What I will present this evening will be giving an overview. At any point, if you wish to hear at least my professional opinion of where we might want to point or head, I'm happy to do that, but at the end of the presentation, I'm going to defer it back to you, Mr. Chair, to begin that discussion, because I know I'm sure there's lots of questions that you as board members may have as well. But I do want you to know that I'm going to be objective and not give opinion unless you ask me of that at this point. So again, as always, our key priorities, we focus on creating a culture of safety and wellness in the division of operations, as well as equitable and transparent fiscal stewardship. Our approach has been, and I'll go back one step and just remind everybody that Orange County is by state statute responsible for the funding of all capital projects. And as a result, about 2 to 2.5 years ago, discussions began on developing a committee that comprised of both school districts in Orange County as well as Orange County general government to pull everyone together to start putting a focus on what had been identified as the underfunding of our capital facilities, and knowing that the county has a responsibility to upkeep those and that they have been underfunded for many years. We have worked with them to develop the core of our plan, which includes one piece, which is the FCI assessment, which is basically the cost to repair a school divided by the estimated cost to replace it. And again, there'll be some slides where I talk about that as not the one solution or determining factor in determining if you need to replace a school. But we've also had to look at capacities, facility age, educational adequacy. Even though our schools may be old, some of them have good classroom spaces. When it comes to educational adequacy, they're not undersized. But what we found is the majority of our schools are undersized, which was a driving force in the county making a decision not to renovate our schools beyond essential maintenance, but to replace them when the time came. because the classroom sizes are just inadequate with respect to modern day standards. We also try to look for the first time in our district to look at short-term and long-term solutions, meaning try to develop a master plan that says these are the schools that are identified in the first phase of a bond referendum, but what would be the next referendum to come in 10 plus years? So at least there's a plan and a rhyme and a rhythm to how you go about it. The challenge that we've had as a district is, and you will see a slide, our need is far greater than our means. It's a matter of, and I've said it, you could almost flip a coin on which schools you do first, because there are so many beyond what the available funding will allow. However, the consultant has said that there are certain schools that have more immediate need to replace than others. But ultimately, and I've said to you, we could replace double the number of schools today if the funding allowed it. Though I don't know if our community could stand the level of construction that would be occurring, but the need is definitely there. The Orange County, just so that everyone knows, this is the first time in history of the funding of capital projects. They have actually established a framework that both school districts have to follow when it comes to capital improvement projects. They're basically saying that as far as for the next 10 years, that all capital projects that are in the approved capital improvement plan that goes before them, all the projects have to be consistent with what the Woolpert plan comprised. So if the project is not identified as a high priority in the Woolpert plan, county commissioners are saying, unless you've got a very compelling reason, they are not entertaining that whatsoever. That is a first. They're saying that you must replace old facilities with new facilities. Now, talk about high priority renovations. They're not saying that we're not going to renovate schools with roofs, electrical, HVAC, safety, security improvements. We're going to do what we have to do that Woolpert identified, but we're not going to go in and tear walls down and then rebuild a school to where in the end you basically got the same bricks, but everything inside has been renovated. They want to take the schools down entirely and rebuild them to modern school facilities. They also want us to address educational adequacy. So that's a big piece of why they're replacing, but when we look at any type of improvements to schools, they're continually will look back at the Woolpert report on the sizing of the classrooms. And then at the same time, they know that the funding is only going to allow, in this case, we have options that go to replacing 3 schools. They know that there are more schools that need to be replaced, but they also know that they have high priority needs. So though there's money that's dedicated to replace schools, the county has done a very nice job in providing funding that will ensure that over 10 years, we have funding for roofing, electrical, mechanical, HVAC, all those essential priority projects that were identified. And that's what we've been doing for many years with our deferred maintenance monies. This is where Woolpert just kind of developed an idea that the need for our district was at just over $573 million. Out of that, over the next 10 years, they're going to be able to support infusing $280 million into our district. Just over $187 million will be for new schools, and $93 million will go towards ongoing major maintenance. So the $187 million is the bonding capacity that they have designated for our district to use to replace schools. I will tell you that in our plans, we've done our best not to maximize that amount, because we know that with budgetary increases, construction costs, and with inflation, we know we need to leave a little contingency there so that when projects are awarded, that there will be some funding, so that at the end, we don't run short and actually have to reduce a project that was approved in your plan. We've been working with the county to do that. Woolpert's recommendations, I want to go over the facility condition index that I mentioned. This is one where they look at, again, the percentage of the cost to repair, to renovate versus replace. I say it's only one indicator because obviously there are schools that could be old, but we have invested money in over time. Or there are schools that were built, the classrooms were built larger. And you saw in our previous presentation where we compared the differences between Phillips and Culbreth Middle. And we determined that Culbreth Middle, if you had to replace one in the future, that at this point we would prioritize Phillips over Culbreth. And one of the primary reasons was the fact of educational adequacy. Culbreth's classrooms are a lot bigger than Phillips. So we know that if it's in this referendum, or if it's in the next referendum, Phillips should be one of the first secondary schools that a board would give priority to, based upon Woolpert's assessment from this past year. Educational adequacy, this is just for the public to see of what it comprises. And again, it measures the ability of the facility to accommodate the existing program and educational offerings. One of the other reasons with educational adequacy that the county is looking to replace schools is they looked at our EC programs and the amount of resources and the sizes of those classrooms, and they determined that in many cases, those rooms were vastly undersized. So they know that they want to improve those environments as well as you replace schools. This is I call it the spaghetti slide, but it's one that just shows you that there's multiple things that go into decision making. And again, the FCI, which is very easy for people to misunderstand, that's only one indicator. And I've given you previously examples as a board of where there's a high FCI, such as Carrboro High School, but we would never dream tearing down Carrboro High School today. But they are at a point where they have major work that has to be done at their school because of its pushing 30-year age. Warburt's recommendations, they boil down to say that Carrboro Elementary, Estes Hills, Frank Porter Graham were the 3 elementary schools that surfaced. And then you had Colbreth and Phillips that were in there as well. And again, we've had discussions between Colbreth and Phillips. In that, you're going to see in these plans that some plans incorporate 3 of those schools, some plans incorporate 3 other schools, but it could be varying schools. So just know that there is no plan that incorporates the replacement of all 5 of these schools. Though we do have a plan that talks about replacing the 3 elementaries and doing high priority needs at Colbreth and Phillips. Respect to community input, this is nothing new. The community, obviously, everyone has recognized the need, as you even heard this evening, for the replacement and improvements in our schools. We've talked about including the community and how that plan can be done. The consultant was hired to determine the what, and we know what the what is, of what needs to be replaced, what needs to be done. It's how we go about doing that and how we infuse the priorities for ourselves as a school district of what our values are and what we believe into that plan. The community also asked about maintaining school walkability and minimizing disruption. I think that any district that makes total sense in being able to ensure that you have schools that are walkable from a transportation efficiency standpoint, from a health standpoint, but at the same time minimizing the disruption, trying to find a way, knowing that redistricting is inevitable in any school district depending upon its growth or its declining growth. It doesn't matter. It does create disruption. So what can you do to minimize that disruption in a plan? And you've seen various iterations, and you will continue to see those this evening. As well as there's been some discussion on assessing the impact on racial or ethnic groups, just to ensure that that's in the back of people's thoughts as they look at these plans to ensure that we're meeting the needs of what the county is asking. And our premise has been to put our children in the newest facilities possible as a primary goal in order to achieve with the funding that we have received. So with bond plan options, I'm going to walk through these, but when we get through the processes, I'm going to move through them fairly quickly, but I do want to read through for folks who are listening. Option 2 is the only option, be it 2 or 2A, and you'll remember very quickly what the A part is. This is the only one that remains that shows the possibility of Spanish dual language consolidation. The other 2 plans do not consolidate, and I say that up front for the listening public because a lot of folks have looked at option 3 and option 5, and they've thought that that's consolidation as part of that. This is the only one, and this is the one that you've heard from this evening that talks about, and we talked last board meeting, about building a new building or addition on the land adjacent to Morris Grove to create a dual language campus. And in doing so, and I say this specifically, that a building or addition, there's no guarantee, given the topography and the layout of the land, that you would be able to connect that building if you were to make a consolidated school. So I specifically state that it's a building or addition. But we know that with the number of students that would be coming in, it would be an additional 350 students. You would have to increase the size of the media center, the cafeteria, all the core services. You know, it's almost like bringing in a second school onto that campus to have the whole program, as we've discussed previously. The students at Morris Grove would be reassigned to adjacent schools that have capacity, and I will talk a little bit more about how that process would work, because it's not just the students at Morris Grove that would be impacted. It's a trickle effect in order to be able to find the capacity. So there are schools that have capacity where some students may move out of that school so other students can move into it. So it's, again, I want to be very clear that reassigning just Morris Grove is not a static process, and it could involve others. Relocating the elementary Spanish dual language and newcomer programs, the idea would be to put all of those programs at FPG, Carrboro, and Northside into the Morris Grove campus. So if you build a second building that would be comprised and work with Morris Grove, you would create one school that would have the entire dual language program inclusive at one point. At that point, we would ultimately then replace Carborough Elementary on site, but in doing so, currently we would use FPG, knowing the students from FPG would move into the Morris Grove campus. FPG would be a temporary swing school for more realistically about 2 years or 2 school years, so that that contractor can have that full site at Carborough and have a new school built there. In the end, in this option here, we talk about going in and replacing Colbreth and then potentially using FPG as a swing site for Colbreth. We're not talking about moving the whole school of Colbreth into FPG, but the site could be used for parking, it could be used for storage. We know that FPG might be viable for that. So then ultimately, in this scenario, FPG would ultimately come offline, but at the same time, at Estes Hills Elementary, we would reassign those students and take that school offline, because you know in this scenario, Estes Hills was also a school that was determined that we need to do something with sooner than later. So that was the idea of being able to do that in that fashion. So when you get to option, and let me walk through it real quick. When you move the students, you build the new addition, you move the students into the dual language program. You then have the swing space for Carborough, you build a new Carborough. After you do that, you can then start building Colbreth, and then ultimately those students move into their new school that's adjacent, and then ultimately you take Estes Hills offline. In option 2A, this is the one where we talked about instead of replacing Colbreth, we replaced Phillips. And in doing so, you still have to take the students from Estes Hills and reassign them to other schools, because in this plan, we're building the new Phillips on the site of Estes Hills. Now that's different than what you're gonna see in the new plan this evening, but this is one where you actually take the space and you maximize its use, and it's not an occupied construction, because obviously if you're replacing Phillips students are still in their school, this will be on the other side of the property, so it's not right next to them per se, though it is physically on the same property. Whereas we do have an option where it's a little tighter. So as you look at option 2 with advantages and disadvantages, some of the advantages, and again, this is all perspective from what lens you're using, but again, all Spanish dual language students, approximately 850, would be put onto one campus. You would continue to reduce the average district school age by about 6 years. You will improve your facility condition index from poor to good. It does minimize the use of additional bus routes, meaning the number of routes that we have that would not add to that at this point. Some of the advantages with Phillips are, if you do replace Phillips, it allows for a quick replacement of the phase 2 elementary schools in the next bond referendum, which could be Estes Hills, Sewell, Ephesus, and Glenwood. At the same time, you're able to address some educational adequacy issues at Phillips, and then any financial savings that you have, you're able to reinvest that. And then obviously we talked a little bit about the fact that when choosing not to replace Colbreth in the first phase, was the fact that there was a 2014 science wing that was added at the school, and you're able to leverage that valuable asset for more years. The disadvantages of this plan, Morris Grove Elementary students, obviously they're displaced, approximately about 400 students, and that they would be part of a boundary change. The displaced Morris Grove Elementary students, their bus time may be increased, meaning obviously the kids who live northwest quadrant of the school, they're gonna have to physically go past their school to either go to Carborough, go to McDougal, and then those students that are at those schools potentially could get moved into schools that are further east in order for that to happen. But their ride time will increase for the most part. The ones that live south of the school, their ride times are minimized, but there is an impact there, and that was important to our community. It is counter to the town of Carborough's walkability efforts and goals. I do have some slides in the presentation. I feel compelled to at least show you the effort and the time that our towns and our citizens have asked of our towns in developing interconnectivity plans when it comes to walkability, bikeability, and just access across the community as a whole. The delay in construction of an addition or a building in this plan, it could result in moving Morris Grove students 3 times instead of 2, meaning that if the project is delayed, you may still have to move the kids. Our goal would be to move kids from Morris Grove directly into those schools, and then Carborough students would move directly into the swing school. Maybe a case where you got to do kind of an in-between, or you have to delay a year and wait for another cycle to come through, meaning you can't do it in the middle of the year and you have to wait a summer, so you lose 6 months of construction time because of a delay. It's a risk, but I feel compelled to at least show that, because if it was to happen, I would not want anyone to come back and say that we never talked about that, because we all know, just if you've had any work done in your homes, renovation work, there are delays, there are things that happen, and we have to be able to pivot and just be ready for that. And some of the other options have similar challenges that I'll talk about. And then through the master plan indicates that building a new element, Estes Hills in the future, that even though we're saying that it's going to be built, there's just no guarantee, and I think that's a valid point to say. We're not in control of that. We can have documentation that says if you take Estes Hills offline now, because you need to take that building offline, and we do have capacity for those students, there's nothing to say that that school will return. Now, if any of you are still on the board, you would have that ability, but it's so long out that I just think that it's one where you just have to be aware of that. So it's an impactful decision. It's not an essential decision, but it is something for people to be cognizant of. And then for 2A, some of the students displaced by dual language consolidation, again, they could be moved twice. And again, that's just a disadvantage that would occur even if it was 2 or 2A. So with option 3, there has been no change in this one as well. This is where we build a replacement FPG dual language elementary school on the land adjacent to Morris Grove. This is where we physically build a school next to Morris Grove, a dual language program. It's not consolidation. This is literally take 500 students from FPG, build them a brand new state-of-the-art facility that meets current instructional program and design standards. But we know that right now the only vacant land that we have, or land that's suitable to build within this area, that's the closest. It's the only land that we have at this point today that we can focus on. So with that being said, the process would be to vacate FPG, move into the new elementary school next to Morris Grove. At that point, FPG could become a swing school for Carborough. We would then replace Carborough. Then you go right in and you replace Colbreth using FPG as the potential swing school. And again, you take FPG offline. And Estes Hills is still in that equation because you still have an older school that you've got to be able to take offline. But funding will not allow us to just add Estes to that given this scenario. So it's a priority game of how many shells can you fit in that process given the budget amount, because that budget amount that the county has set for us, that's fixed. I don't see that changing in the near future. So again, we just walk through the process just as I've described. 3A is just where we replace Colbreth with Phillips Middle School. And as we look at this one, the advantages for option 3, again, no Spanish dual language consolidation. This is just replacing FPG. It's less movement of the students. Obviously, the 350 Estes Hill students compared to option 2A. You're reducing the average district school age by about 13 years. The FCI is going from poor to good for the schools that are impacted. You're maintaining the walkability at Morris Grove and McDougal with this option, because you're not, I'll use the word decimating, the walkability, the neighborhood approach. You're not having students be relocated and being put to other schools. So you do have that walkability that you do have. You maintain Morris Grove's the walkability is with respect to the town of Carborough's interconnectivity efforts. And that's a new piece that I've added, but it is important to talk about because it's fairly substantial, their efforts. It minimizes the use of additional bus routes. Again, I won't go over the Phillips advantages because those are similar as the previous. The disadvantages for option 3, the elementary boundary change would need to occur before the construction of new Phillips, and that would need to reoccur again after the new Estes Hills. So if you were to right size one time, you'd have to come back after you replace Phillips, and there would be potentially when those Estes Hills kids come back, there's a second time that they have to move. So and again, that's all dependent upon the future of what we can predict. But if you take Estes Hills offline and say I'll make it up, year 7 or 8, that's where we land. In year 11 or 12, if there's a new referendum and they're replacing Estes Hills, those students would need to be redistricted again. So there would be some children that could be impacted twice. Again, I'm not going to say that that doesn't happen in public schools across our country. It does, but it is new and it's not often for our district, given its size and the close proximity that we have, being the size of our community is such a size that we're all, as someone used tonight, they call them neighborhoods. I mean, that's what we are in comparison to Orange County. You know, it takes about 22 minutes to go from one quadrant to the next here in our district. In Orange County, it takes a lot longer to go from one corner to the next corner. You know, so it's all relative in time, but at the same time, our density is a lot greater here. And then obviously through the master plan, it indicates that Estes Hills doesn't guarantee that it'll be built. I mean, I can't reiterate that enough because people just need to know that that is an important piece as you look at the needs of what Wolpert had specified as priority. All right, so now we get to the new option. And I'm going to say this, as this has been an iterative process, and as we have been spending time getting input from you, getting input from the community, you know, our facilities team, our consultants, we've all been working on trying to find ways to meet the needs of everyone in the most non-disruptive way, but at the same time doing it to where it's manageable and it's cost-effective. And we were very pleased. We reached out to the architect of record for Northside Elementary School. Give you a little background of why we reached out to an architectural engineering consultant. We reached out to them because Northside Elementary is a structure that's built on a hill. And it's built on a very tight footprint, if you want to call it that, for those who have been there. So we wanted to reach out to them because I've talked to you about the site at Estes Hills, that the topography between the front of the campus and the back of the campus is pretty substantial. We've talked about ADA issues, about getting down to the athletic fields. We've talked about accessibility even at Estes Hills and even Phillips. It is a challenge on that site, and it's not, a lot of our sites are that way. We have a few sites that are very flat, but most of our sites have a lot of hills and a lot of trails and a lot of rocks and things that we have to get around continually. So we reached out to them to try to gain a better understanding of what can we do? And I did not feel confident unless we had civil engineers actually look at the topography of the soil and the movement and then look at placement. So in doing so, the goal was to try to see, could you build or replace Estes Hills and Phillips while keeping the children at the schools? Now in my career, I've worked on several projects where we've had occupied renovations, meaning you've done renovation work in the building that children are still occupying. And I've done work where you've built schools next to schools. So I've had some experience in that to know that it is possible, but you really have to have professionals on the front end at a certain confidence level be able to determine, can you do that? Because clearly, would not want to recommend anything that can hinder the educational environment for the students that are there at that time. I'm not going to say that it's going to be like a library and quiet on the site, but it is one where you can manage it to where it's possible. But we had to find out. So that's what you see as different, is that we have had an option that I will tell you, and I take full ownership in this, if the county and the hiring of Wolpert as a consultant had done more with at least a little of the how with them and had the engineers, we would have been able probably to have this as a first iteration. And I'm gonna say that up front, but that was not the path we went down, and that was just a decision. I still think that the Wolpert plan is a solid plan. From an optimization standpoint, it focuses on, that's the North Star that I think we always have to follow, and that's what the county commissioners are doing. But then we got to find a way to implement that that's palatable to our community, is the phrasing that I've been using. So with that being said, we're talking about building a replacement FPG next to the land, on the land next to Morris Grove. So nothing has changed there. Now we're not talking about consolidation again. This is about just a physical new dual language center being built. And it would accommodate the children that are currently in the existing FPG today. We would vacate FPG, move into the new elementary school that is built. That would allow us, FPG, to be a swing school for up to 2 years in order for us to replace Carborough Elementary. You know, we have confidence that, you know, FPG is on its, I'll say its last leg, but it's the matter of, it's got 10 years. What the consultant is saying is you can't go more than 10 years. They strongly do not recommend that. So we know we've got some flexibility there. We feel confident that we can continue to maintain it enough to be able to use it as a swing space, but that's gonna allow us on the Carborough site to build a structure that in a very expeditious way, but also build a structure that builds up and provides even more palatable green space for the children. Because I've talked with you, there's a huge swale on that property, and when it rains, there are challenges to where the children, obviously for days, may not have access to certain parts of that property because of that. And it's just the way that the property was designed back in 1958, I believe. In doing so, this plan would allow us to continue to perform high maintenance priority projects at Colbreth and Phillips. So though we're not replacing one of those schools, we're still doing the high priority maintenance. And then we would construct a new elementary school for Estes Hills right there on site while the children remain in Estes Hills. So I've described it, but I'm going to show you the visual that kind of goes through the phases. You've seen a slide that shows it together, but you know, I like to do the process slides. So again, we're just walking through building a new FPG next to Morris Grove. In doing so, that allows FPG to be vacated, it allows Carborough Elementary to move in so that we can replace Carborough. It allows us at the same time, we can continue to complete the high priority projects, be it most of it is roofing, HVAC, electrical at those schools. At Phillips and Colbreth, we can build the new Estes Hills. The one thing that I'm going to talk about in the site plan is that the site is tight with what I'm proposing. The one plan is that ultimately, when Estes Hills starts to be built in this idea, immediately the athletic field, the primary athletic field, will be impacted. You'll see the graphic that will demonstrate that. During the construction of Estes Hills, Phillips will more than likely be able to use half of that field for PE. You know, there would be a construction fence, a barrier for the site, would allow them to still participate in activities. But ultimately, in this plan, we would need to find an alternative site for competitive games for whatever period of time it takes to ultimately, until you replace Phillips Middle School itself. So that could be 2 years, it could be 4 years. You know, obviously Phillips will be a high priority school. It's just whenever the timing is to replace, to have enough money to start the second referendum, and Phillips should be included in that. We have all the confidence that we could relocate competitive activities to where schools would just have away games at the middle school athletic level that utilize that field only, that they would have those games at other schools, and it could be the high schools or the middle schools. There's been a lot of talk over the past several weeks about partnering with the YMCA. If this is a plan that's adopted, we are happy to reach out with our athletic directors and reaching out to the YMCA and other community groups to assess maybe there is a closer possibility for children to be able to get to than going to, say, Smith Middle or going to Chapel Hill High or East Chapel Hill High to have those games. But it is one, we feel that it's pretty confident. And again, my experience with other districts, this is something that it's just a necessary pain that you go through, but if it gets the school replaced and it allows children not to be disrupted, you just have to make a decision in balancing it. This is something that you do prescribe to. Ultimately, here is where we show that the Estes Hill students move in, and then we will perform district-wide boundary adjustments. Now, this is the piece, when you look at minimizing student disruption, that I think this is a big piece. You know, if we are able, with our budget, to replace Carborough, which currently has 500 students, and we're able to build a school that stays within the budgeted funds that we have to go 600 to 650 students, we will add capacity to that school. At the same time, we replace Estes Hills, which is a 500 student school, and if we can do the same, potentially a similar design, because the footprints potentially could be very similar, but the idea would be to do that. That's going to add capacity. We know that Estes Hills, one of the reasons we talked about taking it offline is the fact that it is lower. There are 350 students there versus 500, so there are less students. So we know if we go from a 350 school to a 650 school, we've got 300 seats. Ultimately, that's the time where I would recommend, instead of redistricting on the front end and then coming back and doing it again to where some students could be redistricted twice in a 5-year period, let's just do it once and right size. But in the end, in that plan, ultimately, a demographer is going to come back to you and say, when we right size our schools and you fill the capacity and put our kids in the newest buildings, we know that we're at 80% capacity at the elementary level today. there will be schools that you will be able to remove all students from physically and put them into our newest facilities. So what I'll say, and I'm not prepared to talk about schools tonight, but in the long term, when this redistricting would occur, and I would say that this would occur in the current plan, you would probably redistrict in about year 8 at the earliest. That's when you would right size and get it to where we're operating at an efficient level from a fiscal responsibility standpoint. But that's the time where you would need to go through the boundary process. And there would be schools potentially that could come offline at that point. Now, I say that, and obviously the elementary schools that are on the list that are remaining, they include, obviously, Sewell, Glenwood, Ephesus. Those schools are still out there. And there would be decisions to be made of what we would do and how we might do that. And that's a long ways away. But in the end, if we're going to be responsible and operate most efficiently, that's the goal, to do it on the back end. But it just minimizes disruption to the kids. We did not have that ability until we were able to do the diligence to determine that those schools could be built simultaneously while they're occupied. So I just want to quickly go through the process. This is the existing site at Estes Hills. And again, I say Phillips Middle School future. In no way am I suggesting in this plan that we are replacing Estes Hills and Phillips at the same time. Future means it's in the future Estes Hills. Maybe I should have put present or proposed plan, but I just want to make sure there's no confusion in that for anyone. In doing so, you see the topography of this site, just so that you know. Those have not been in these two schools. When you come off Estes Drive, you can, as a parent, you can walk right into the front of the school at both of these schools. Phillips is a 2-story structure. Estes Hills has a back area that's got a 2-story structure, but for the most part, from the first level, it's fairly ADA accessible. It's when you get to the back of the schools where the ADA or the topography changes or the accessibility becomes a challenge. In doing so, the football field is at the lowest point on the site. The baseball field is at one of the highest points, very similar to the front entrance of Phillips Middle. So I say that because when I get to these slides, it's going to make sense. But when you look at the back of Estes Hills, that's fairly low. That's down there with the football field for Phillips Middle, topography-wise. So that's the hill that I'm talking about without having the lines on there. So the idea would be that we would build Estes Hills, and it's basically on the right side of the middle school competitive field while the children are still occupied. And the design here, the concept here, is that we would follow the McDougall Elementary Middle School approach, meaning we were going to build ultimately there would be 2 schools that physically would be combined so that you could have some shared services. I'm not suggesting instructional changes. That's something for the district to decide down the road. I'm talking about building shared services where the cafeteria could be shared, the library could be shared, certain meeting rooms could be shared depending upon how you design that school. But in doing so, Estes Hills would be built with a much larger library and a much larger cafeteria because ultimately Phillips, you're going to see, will connect to that and then it will be shared just as we do at McDougall Elementary and Middle School today. So I say that so that it's not going to, it will be a little larger on the front end, but then there will be less investment for the middle school on the back end because you won't have to build those core services and have that square footage added to the footprint. So in the end, you would have the parking would be where the school is ideally today. The buses would come in off the new entrance. That's the roads that have already been adjusted on the side. The buses would come in right now, they would come in the front. And then there would be a bus turnaround for the buses as well, where that's necessary. But you'd have to have some temporary access for buses because this is only one piece of I'll call it a kind of a master plan. Down the road, you could connect to Phillips Middle School beside it, and that's where the entire field is not accessible to Phillips. So this would be a time that the Phillips has not had a home competitive game while Estes Hills has been there. While their school's being built, they would not be able to use it during PE time. However, there would be some green space that would be available potentially up by the softball field, so they would have some PE space. It would just have to shift. Now, in doing so, you see the yellow, you see where the bus loop kind of gets extended, and this is the piece that I will talk about. Because if you ultimately, you would have buses on the left side of the campus, The baseball field would be moved toward the front of the property. The parking for the school would be in the front. So parents and people would arrive to both of those schools in the front, and they're able just to walk right in at the top elevation, just like you do today. The students, though, this is an idea where I see this as a big advantage to this site, is where you're able to separate parent vehicles, private vehicles from buses, because the buses would come in on the right side and they would go behind the campus. So the students would actually get off their buses and go in the lower level of the school, just like we have at Northside today. The students come in the lower level, then they work their way up. Parents would still come in on the second floor, but the students would come in on the first floor, which is kind of like the lower level, but they come in the back. So you're separating vehicular movement. And then ultimately they would come right back out on Estes Hills Drive. So you're separating buses from parents and private drivers. The football field is something that I'm kind of excited about with this idea. I never imagined it, but I've talked about ADA accessibility with our schools. This is one where the football field would be put at a higher elevation. Remember I mentioned the softball field, the baseball field, or the baseball field's already there. This would allow greater public access. And from a safety security standpoint, it's at a level that people can see, because right now the athletic field is behind the school, it's down a hill, it's not accessible, it's not visible. We open up all of our middle schools for the public, the tracks, so this is an advantage, I think, for the community. And it's very similar to what we have at McDougal Middle School, where the athletic fields are on the side, but it's in a very visible area if you pull up into the parking lot. That's a disadvantage that I see at currently at Phillips that at least we can address. So as we get through here, a lot of it I've already said, but when you look at the advantages and disadvantages, the one thing I will say is this plan also probably follows even more so Wolpert's recommendation, because they did put that the 3 elementary schools were some of the most greatest needs, especially when it came to educational adequacy. And again, Carborough Elementary is where educational adequacy had some challenges, as well as FPG and obviously Estes Hills. This allows Estes Hills to remain on site while the school is constructed. It does have the best average district school age reduction by 12 years. It's because you're replacing 3 of your oldest schools. I mean, mathematically, that's what's going to happen. So it's not a silver bullet here. That's what's going to happen because they're the oldest. It does improve the facility condition index for these schools. Obviously, you're going from poor to best. They're all brand new. So that's a big positive. There's no high maintenance priorities embedded into this on the elementary level. It does maintain the walkability for Morris Grove and the town of Carborough's interconnectivity efforts, and we saw that previously in option 3. It does minimize the use of bus routes, and it does, for the demands of our transportation department, it does allow for Wolpert's recommended district boundary changes to occur in their optimization. And again, that's one time versus multiple times, so that as a result does minimize disruption. The replacement of Estes Hills does allow for the potential replacement of the future elementary schools. It actually accelerates it because we're not waiting for the project to happen, it's actually happening. So that's an advantage. And then it will still allow, the funding will allow us to continue to do the high priority needs at Colbert and Phillips. So it's not as if they're not gonna have anything done to them, they will continue to have those improvements that are done. For the disadvantages, the athletic field, I just put that out there. I think it's a minor disadvantage, but it is something that can be very impactful. And again, I think it's a scheduling exercise, and I think that we can accomplish that, be it it's at the middle school level, and we do have field accessibility throughout our district. At the same time, the construction and phasing, it is more impactful than 3.3A. And in Plan 3.3A, we're replacing Phillips, and we're putting it on top of what used to be Estes Hills school site. It's clear that the students, there's no one on that side. Where in this case, we do have students that are still in the school where there's construction happening behind it. So the phasing is more impactful because when you move from one phase to the next, the greatest challenge in any type of occupied renovation is getting occupancy from fire and from your building permits office, because you cannot occupy unless you do so. So that's where it gets phased. Phasing becomes a challenge. One of the things that I have put in here is potentially FPG could still be there. It still could be accessible potentially if the buildings are in still good shape. And we might find that the projects could even be accelerated if the contractor says, look, if you could move the students out of Estes Hills while we're constructing it, and you could move them to FPG for 6 months and give us the rest of that site, we could have everybody back in that building even sooner. I mean, there's a possibility that could occur. Or they may say, we need to start on the parking so that you get your life safety permit portion approved, and we can get you into the building. So we leave that as a disclaimer, but the architect and the civil engineer felt pretty confident that they could make this work, and that's by having some temporary bus spaces and parking spaces before the permanent ones are developed. So we feel pretty confident with that. Now, what I will tell you is the level of research and design is very topical at this point, except for this option. There have been some mathematical calculations, there are professional opinions. It's not just coming from the consultant. But I do want to say that as we get through further, if this was the one or any of these are to be adopted, things are subject to change. And how we go about things could change. But this is something that, given the people who worked on this are 30-year professionals, they've done this many times, they felt pretty confident. And I quartered them and said, if there is any consternation, if there's I need to hear that. And they felt pretty confident at that point. So, and again, they've worked for us. We know that they have design school, and civil engineering has been very good for both Northside and for Chapel Hill as far as the permitting process and getting things approved in that respect. So with that being said, I did talk, and this is new, I'm not going to walk through these slides, these are very informational. The towns of Chapel Hill and Carrboro, both towns respectively, have spent a lot of time and I will say a lot of monies developing plans. Now what I will say is a lot of times plans sit on shelves because they're not able to implement them because of funding. But what I will say is Dr. Stewart and I and several of our safety team folks, we meet with the Safe Routes to Schools committee that is with Chapel Hill and Carrboro. We've spoken with their representatives. And there's been a lot of progress that's been done in this community on creating interconnectivity with our schools. In my opinion, it would be, as we look at interconnectivity, we should look at the schools that have the greatest connectivity opportunities versus ones that have the least. So when we get to looking at down the road, schools that you might consider taking offline, I would look at schools that have the least walkability, either by its physical layout or by what has happened with development over time that has precluded it from being the most walkable. All of our schools are walkable to some degree, but some schools are lesser walkable than others, and we've talked about this. But I just want to show you that for the town of Carrboro, there's been a lot of discussion about completing a lot of trails and bike paths that you'll see there's dotted lines on here, and there are funding cycles to where they're looking to get those approved. The other thing I will say just about the Boris Grove community, there is a lot of land out there, and there's a lot of land that the county owns that we've talked about a future site for a middle school and the portion of the land that would be used for FPG in two of our proposals. There's a lot of talk about affordable housing and that this is an area that is being targeted or promoted for where there is land to grow to try to add affordable housing as much as possible within this area. And we know that there are properties that Habitat for Humanity already owns, where they have land within this community. We see Phoenix Place. We're talking about the green track down the road. I'm talking about all about affordable housing. So we know that though there may not be a lot of dense housing, and I should probably use the word dense, there's not a lot of housing in that area. There's potential for more housing to come over time. So it's not as if there is a moratorium on the development within this community. If the developers come, I think the town of Carrboro is going to embrace it and they're going to allow it, but they are pushing for affordability, and as well as the town of Chapel Hill for the sections that are within their town and not Carrboro. So again, I'd be remiss not to show that. And just showing the bike plan that they have. Right now there's one primary trail that goes directly up to Boris Grove. They're talking about improvements on Old 86. They're talking about the connectors that tie into where multiple neighborhoods can connect. And obviously, in many of these towns, there's adequate lighting, there's clearance from a safety perspective to promote persons of many ages to be able to walk on and to promote that healthy lifestyle. Again, just another slide that shows the big picture for Carrboro and their bike plans, but it's just more for informational. There are documents that are on their websites, their PDFs that are hundreds of pages long that talk about the in-depth process. But this process goes back 10, 20 years in planning. So it's not an understatement, and I just think it's important that we at least recognize that. With Chapel Hill, I just wanted to show you, Chapel Hill's been very aggressive in being able to, because of a grant they received, they actually have a person for Safe Routes to Schools that is dedicated. And they've got an RFP that's going out there to where they're gonna have a company come in and look at a half-mile radius around all of its schools to try to make recommendations on how to make the first half mile safer for our children to be able to access daily to our schools. And I wanted to show just the Estes Hills. We've all talked about the road that has recently opened, the length of time that it's taken for that to be completed. But it does show you that that is part of the midline plan and that it does exist. But each of those pockets that you see, those blue circles on the left, those are our schools that are within Chapel Hill, and those are the areas that they're going to focus on. Our walk distances are greater than a half mile. They recognize that, but for funding, they've got to start at the first half mile, and their goal is with future funding to be able to expand that so that their assessment parallels what our walking distances are with respect to that. So here, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because, but what I will say is there are things that have changed from the last meeting, and it's because the options have changed. So when you compare the two, you have to compare the ones that are there versus ones that are not there. And at the same time, we have done some more diligence in looking at walkability, transportation, ride times, impact with disruption to kind of see that you will see that in most cases, some things have improved and some things have gotten a little worse. But I've denoted them. So for instance, here when it comes to the county's requirements, we're still within the SAFO compliance by not adding more square footage than we need based upon our current enrollment, and we're still within the principles of the Wolpert Plan. The district priorities with the educational adequacy, it addresses it. But again, when it comes to student displacement, option 5 is the least disruptive because you're doing it once and not at multiple times, or you're not disrupting students from their residential schools, if you want to call it that. And then you have the dual language consolidation, which really is only applicable to 2 or 2A, not applicable to the others. When it comes to transportation impact, the student ride time is where you see the change. When you come over here for option 2A, we do believe that if we were to consolidate at Morris Grove, more and more we think that the ride time will be extended for some students that I mentioned, the students that would be driving past Forest Grove, and also that there would be ride times for students that are at other schools that have to be reassigned as a result of Morris Grove students possibly moving into those schools. So again, it's a risk that's out there, but again, if you can minimize that, that's the best way to go. And then the walkability to school, option 3A, obviously that changed to yellow, and again, that's just a change. So when we get into facilities optimization, the only thing here that you see, the reduction of the portfolio reduction for 2A, it's obviously less than 3 and 5 options and we shared that with the advantages, disadvantages, and then for the phasing challenges. The phasing for the consolidation, it's a challenge, and it was no different than with McDougall that I discussed with you. The purpose of sharing with you the Morris Grove option was just to be able to show you that objectively, that was the only other option that we saw where you could actually consolidate and create. And if the land wasn't adjacent to Morris Grove would have never been an option. Whereas McDougall, the schools were combined. So it just shows you that I had to add that obviously, that's a challenge. And then I have to denote that option 5, there are the ease of construction. It's an occupied school replacement, so it's not, I can't say it's a green, but if there was a color between yellow and green, it would be more toward that. But it's got an impact, so I got to put that out there. All right, so with all that being said, what I will tell you is the goal in presenting this to you has been to try to take your input, try to take the input that we've received, starting with the plan, and ultimately try to give you some viable options to consider. I will say this, generally as a rule, we've had projects, we present them to you, you approve them, we move on. I will say that we've had iterations. We really haven't changed the what in what I've presented today. It's really the how, and that's what you're having some choices with. But ultimately, in the end, what I will ask of you is knowing that we've got our bond education committee for the county that's going to be starting at the end of the month. We've got to take anything that we do, we have to get the County Board of Commissioners to approve it. So we could approve something today, and until they approve it, it's not a done deal to at least move. My disclaimer is to remind everybody, the county, when they created their guardrails, They did say that on an annual basis, or as necessary, we could come back to them and can either change or amend our plan. So anything you decide tonight, we know from previous bonds, doesn't mean that it's gonna be what happens in the end. That's just a reality. They have given you as an elected board the ability, if you stay within their guardrails, that you can amend the plan. So I say that so that tonight, what I really need to hear back from you, and the board chair talked about this at the beginning, is really getting an idea of, we're gonna prioritize, we need to replace these schools. And if we can say that, then that's what we need for the bond. We need to say, we're gonna do something here. How we go about it can still change over time, but we gotta be able to say, what is the what? Because the what are the schools that we want to put into that. So I just encourage a discussion for that, because ultimately, we've gotta get there in order to be ready for the Bond Education Committee as they really get into full mode, September, October. We've gotta be there. So really August, early September, I would say is probably the latest that we need to go in front of the commissioners for them to be able to approve this, so that they can stay on track, knowing that we're just one piece of the entire bond process, with Orange County Schools being the second part. Mr. Chair, I turn it back over to you for questions.
Great. Al, first of all, thank you very much. We appreciate the incredible detail. I know you slipped in a small vacation yourself in the last couple of weeks. I don't know how you do it, but thank you so much.
It was a working vacation.
Well, thank you. So to my colleagues, in terms of process, what I'm going to do is ask each of you to take a couple minutes and ask your questions. And if you have a comment about kind of what you're thinking is, share that, and then we'll go from there, because I do want to get us to narrow our focus significantly tonight if it's humanly possible. So that's kind of what we're going to do. And I'm just going to start by going to my right and come across, if that's okay with you all, because I'm sure everybody has questions and wants to ask things.
Well, I just want to echo the compliments. I mean, this is really incredible. I really like the slide that had the red, blue, green. Like, technically, they're incredible slides, but more importantly, like substantively, I just appreciate how much you've incorporated feedback, so thank you. I mean, I think option 5 has a lot to offer, I really do. The one main question I have about it came up in some emails that we got and also some comments tonight in public comment, mostly from FPG families, and it concerns student ride time. Like, if we were to move FPG as it is to Morris Grove, and I realize we might not know this now, but I'm assuming it is knowable at some point. I do wonder about student ride time, not just in the aggregate, but disaggregated by school and then disaggregated by national origin as well. So I'm concerned about our Latinx families at FPG not having to, it's about distance, but also like physical distance, cultural distance. So, but just the physical distance, I guess, is my first question, is just about student ride time if we were to put FPG and the Morris Grove project.
Yeah, so I'll have a few comments, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Stewart, who's the transportation team has looked at this in detail. You know, the program is moving from the southeast quadrant to the, southwest quadrant to the northwest quadrant. So there are pockets within the community where there will be an increased time. If you live next to FPG, your ride is not going to be 2 minutes. It's going to go to 12 minutes. I mean, I've driven from FPG to Morris Grove, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It's 15 minutes worst case scenario, but it's 12, 15 minutes. If you live right around the Colbreth, Carborough High School area, that's impacted. But for folks that, and if you live on the far eastern side by Rashkis, there is an increase of about 10 minutes in time on average. If you go on Waze or Google and you just look at it different times, just look at traffic, if you're just going from one point to the next. Now, be it bus routes, do different things, but when you just look at the quickest, most efficient way, those are the 2 pockets that are impacted by that. Everyone else, it's just a matter of, instead of going down, you go up. We talked a little bit about, you know, when you're on 15501 and you get off the 54 and you go north, there are times of the day where that section right there, that's where it's heated, and that's where there potentially is extra time that is taken. A lot of times it'll show that, you know, for people who drive in private vehicles, you would get on the Interstate 40 and you cut around to get all the way over to Morris Grove. You know, what I say about the times is, you know, for me, it's about getting our children to the newest facilities and doing everything that we can. Be it it's a program, I think that no matter where you put it, the caution that I give about its placement is it is a program, and I'm sure that we see that, you know, when you have a program, if it's geographically right here, parents are gonna put into the lottery to try to get into that program because it's a school that's right there if they have an interest in it, right? So we know that there are people who attend FPG that live within that community. But at the same time, when you build schools or at least when you develop programs, it's always been my experience, and again, I'm not shooting this down at all. It's just you gotta know that where people live today and where they live in 20 years can change. You know, communities change, people spread out. If we add more and I don't want this to sound like a stereotypical comment, but if we add affordable housing, if that's added, that's important to the communities in the Morris Grove area, you're gonna have more people that are gonna be moving into that area because it's more affordable. And I think that you may see shifting, but we see that with I've seen it with all kinds of programs over the years, though it may start. So I say that there are definitely some pockets. Anytime you move a program, even if we moved a program to the eastern side of the district, we moved it over near Ephesus, as an example, you're gonna create distances. Some people are gonna be a lot closer and other people are gonna have to. So it's just a matter of trying to find that balance. But Dr. Stewart can talk about at least some of the preliminary transportation information. As far as ridership, as far as who's scheduled to ride buses, how many kids ride buses, and what that kind of looks like from the transportation management system standpoint.
Absolutely. Al did a great job.
Before you get started, Dr. Stewart, do we need this level of detail right now, Barb, into your question? Because I'm just trying to get the sort of general, let people get their big concerns out here so we can see where this is going. Because this sounds like a down the road kind of, it's a legitimate concern. But I ask you that, since you asked the question.
It's just about about student ride time, if it's disaggregatable, even if it's not, we don't know that right now. Understanding that it can change, et cetera.
So I would say that we would have to go a little further to break it down. We know currently that 56% of the FPG community are assigned to buses. Now, being assigned, we dealt with this in the last meeting, being assigned to bus and actually being on the bus are two different things. So we have on record right now 278 stops. Some of those are individual student stops. But some of these are also consolidated stops that we put into place last year. It would extend ride times probably up to 10 minutes for those students around, say, for example, the Glenwood area, like Al was saying. But for the most part, we feel comfortable that in those morning rides, we have 10 buses right now assigned to FPG in the morning, that we could probably get this done and stay within the board's policy 6321 with those ride times.
Okay, Vicki?
I thank you for all the work that you guys have been putting into this. I really do. And I have not so much a specific question for you at this point, but a few comments that I would definitely like to say in terms or in response to some of the things that I've heard tonight and ongoing. One, in terms of the walkability of our schools. We hear a lot about the walkability of our schools, and we have a whole lot of people that are concerned with just their school and its walkability. So when we break it down, you think about the fact that so many people want to talk about our village or our community. Well, if the Chapel Hill Carrboro City School District is our community and if Chapel Hill is our village, and for people who didn't know, historically Chapel Hill was nicknamed a village on the hill. So just in case you know, people didn't know that. So in terms of that being seen as the village, we are not doing a very good job thinking collectively. And I would have to say that as our town has grown, have we stopped to think about the fact that redistricting has had to happen for so many different reasons over the years, and there are lots of people, when some are saying that there are not voices in the room that to be considered. That is, unfortunately, that has been a part of our district, but I think even for people who aren't here now, some of those voices are being considered, but let's consider the ones where walkability hasn't been an issue ever since they were displaced. And if you think people weren't displaced in this community, you haven't been here long enough. So we're not taking into account the students who are Joe Mack Road. We're not taking into account the students that are Neville Road. We're not taking into account the students that are Rangewood, Hatch Road, Damascus Church Road. Let's think about those students. No matter what option we're talking about, none of it is going to be walkable for them. We're not thinking about the fact that this bond is a county-wide bond, and the kids that live in Pleasant Green, Eflin, Cedar Grove, Mebane, who need decent schools on that side of the county as well. If we're going to think collectively, they deserve good schools too. We all have a spot in this. And then, and I'll go on to say that I've heard so many people talk about FPG needing to remain in a centralized location. The word centralized is subjective. You're saying central to what? Because if you're talking about the bus line, Chapel Hill Transit, it goes a pretty good ways. But if you want to look at how far FPG is to the next district over, you're talking about 3 miles to the Chatham County line. So if you're talking about roughly 3 miles to the Chatham County line, I would argue that that's not centralized Chapel Hill. Not at all. But if you stop and think about the fact that as the town grows and it changes, centralized does change. Again, it's subjective. And if it's a program, then wherever you put it, then accommodations would need to be put into place for that program to succeed. It's not as if someone is saying, let's move it to the border of Alamance and Chatham all together. I'm being hypothetical here, and not provide any support. I don't think that's what anyone is saying at all. I'm just saying I think we need to step back and think about those things, because it doesn't appear to be very thoughtful in that. It's like, we know we need this, we know we need this, but as long as you keep your hands off of my school, we're okay. And if you touch my school, then we're not gonna vote for what needs to happen. So anybody else's community or anybody else's children, they're completely irrelevant. And if that's how we need to be thinking about it, then I think we need to check ourselves and look in the mirror. I mean, I know what I may be saying may not be very popular, but it needs to be said. And again, I say that these situations in which children, and you want to talk about how long they're on the buses, I mean, Chapel Hill is not that big. For every elementary school to get to Morris Grove, FPG 12 minutes, Raskus 20 minutes, Glenwood 18 minutes, Scroggs 17 minutes, Sewell 8 minutes, Ephesus 17 minutes, Carver 11 minutes. That's from all our other elementary schools. That's not where the children live. That's from school to school. So if we know that the town is changing, and we know that placement of housing is changing, and you went on to say that we know affordable housing is supposedly a big objective right now. Well, let's look at the fact that the reason it's a big objective now is because so many people who were in the center of town that could walk to school no longer can because of gentrification. That is why we no longer have so many people in the middle of town that can walk to school. So let's talk about what the facts really are. And then maybe consider, who would it serve to maybe not have a dual language school put on that side of town? Because, I don't know, maybe it's people who don't want it out there. Stop and think about it. We have to think about tough decisions. We have to think about tough conversations. Because if you put a dual language program, wherever you put it, it needs support. And that's what we need to stop and think about. It needs support, and it needs to be for who it's intended for. So I just, like I said, I didn't really have a question per se. I do appreciate the work that you guys have done. I think that, for me, I think that not consolidating dual language, that's not a major objective for me. I think trying to have kids in the best schools and to be able to get them there safely. Would I love for everybody to be able to walk to school? I would. But realistically, I know that that is not the place where we live. Chapel Hill is named Chapel Hill for a reason. It is not flat. It's in the middle of a very small mountain little zone at the foothills, and people didn't know that either. So this is just what it is. So I just say that to say I think we need to take a step back and think more collectively, because we're not. No matter how much you want to say we are, nobody, I don't hear a whole lot of people talking about the community at large. And I know that redistricting happened just because of numbers where you needed kids to be in a school for a long time here. You want to talk about redistricting that had nothing to do with programming. You want to talk about kids that went to 3 different elementary schools within 3 years just because they needed the numbers to be at a different place. So don't tell me it hasn't happened here, and don't tell me it's not realistic. So it's not always about my child, my child. Sometimes it happened to the other people's children. And I know what the other people's children look like, because I know I was a child that went to 3 different elementary schools in 3 different years because our school district needed black numbers in different places. So I don't want anybody to try to tell me I don't know what I'm talking about. That's all right.
Thank you, Vicki. Teresa?
Thank you, Al. I know we talked a lot. There are pieces of each plan I like. There are pieces of each plan I don't like. For me, I'm thinking about the bigger facility need of the district. You know, I appreciate all the emails and people talking about their kids, but we've got a lot of things happening. 1,200 vacant seats across our district. Morris Grove, I pulled up what our capacity numbers. Morris Grove, 201 vacant seats. We're paying for an under-capacity school to operate and staff. Scroggs, 197, Rashka's 159, Estes 181, Ephesus 96, you know, and so on and so forth. Those are, you know, in the hundreds. That's costing us a lot of money. Our next agenda item is our operational budget, different than our bond. Different than our facility bond. 2 different pots of money. A gentle reminder to the community, we cannot take bond money and pay teachers. We cannot take bond money and pay the electric bill. We cannot take bond money and pay for any of the operational things that Jonathan is gonna talk to us about and the reality of that situation, right? So I wanna make sure that's clear. Please tell your neighbor before they stand up and speak and say, we could take that bond money and pay for teachers. No, we cannot, okay? Let's be clear. So for me, I'm looking at, wow, we've got a bunch of under capacity facilities operating. Nobody wants their school community to get broken up. I agree with Vicki, reassignment probably is gonna happen. It's probably gonna need to be some of the discussions that we need to start having as a community. We all need to participate in this. I appreciate that people have the financial ability to advocate for what their views are, but our district doesn't have the financial ability to continue to operate the way we do. And for me, as a board member, to say, I'm not gonna vote for the bond, like Vicki said, because I don't get my way, that's disappointing. My kids went to school in Sewell, and I love that community, but I want so desperately for that staff and that community to have a new school. And my kids are not at Sewell anymore, but I would never say that, but if it's not for my kids, and I don't want my kids to have this problem, I'm not gonna vote for the bond. That's so unfair to our staff and to our kids who go to some of the oldest schools that I've ever seen. And I lived in Baltimore City schools, and I thought those were some terrible schools in a lot of ways, and old buildings too. And I was appalled when I moved here to see these old schools, and to hear community members say, well, I'm not gonna vote for our kids or my neighbors' kids to go to a newer school, and the wonderful staff that we have working every day to be able to work in a better school, that's very disappointing. So I agree with Vicki, some of us need to check what we're talking about. And again, it's not just us, it's Orange County schools too, right? Okay, and that community, the demographic, the financial situation of that community is very different than you and your neighbors. So we need to be mindful, it's not just us, okay? So going back to the actual plans for me, you know, I really want us to be thoughtful about, this is gonna be a long process. And I have to give credit to George. I just want to focus on schools, because when we start talking about put the school here, put the school there, and people start getting upset about that. And so I don't love that. I just want 3 new schools at this point. One thing I do want to say is I want us to be thoughtful, though, about those things. I think, Al, I've talked to you about this. I don't love the idea, knowing we've got 1,200 seats that we're under capacity at across our district, that we're going to plop 2 elementary schools right beside each other. That just, to me, from a facility standpoint, an operational standpoint, that doesn't make any sense for me. Now, other board members may disagree. So as we're thinking about building these 3 schools, I want us to think about some really interesting ideas, and I think, Al, you might be heading in that direction when you're thinking about building up, like Northside, that we think about, can we wiggle out capacity in these new schools and think about that dreaded reassignment that nobody's gonna wanna do, but we're gonna need to do it. We're gonna need to do it, and we need to own that. And we start pulling in some of it, because we're not gonna get that burst of a population growth here. We're gonna get 1,200 elementary school kids here in the next 10 years. I don't see it. None of our data is saying that we're gonna get it. We can build a lot, but we have so much under capacity here that it's not saying that we're gonna fill up these 1,200 seats as quickly as we think we are. Also, I think it'll free us up as we consolidate a little bit, that it'll give us time to plan for maybe some of those other locations that we may have to take out of commission for a little while, to be thoughtful about them, because maybe they are challenging geographically from topography and things like that. And maybe we can be a little bit more thoughtful. It'll give us more time as a district to think about how we rearrange those. But at this point, I don't necessarily say I love any plan. I love parts of them. You know, I'm interested about the SD's rebuild on site. That seems very interesting. And I don't love the 2 elementary schools beside each other. I'm looking at our capacity numbers across our district, and I think it's just, I don't think long-term. I live on the northern part of Chapel Hill. They're building a bunch of townhomes. They're not building multi-dwelling units down the road from me. And so unless that happens in the next 10 years, when we're trying to put 2 elementary schools beside each other, I don't feel comfortable doing that, knowing that we've got that rain track property where there's another elementary school that potentially could be built down there. That's a lot of elementary schools and a lot of single-family homes and townhomes in North Chapel Hill. It's not high density like it is more southern part of Chapel Hill and things like that. And I think we've got some land options that we can think about long-term as we talk about this bigger plan. I think that's it for me, George. I may circle back because other people
Once we
talk.
get a chance. Thanks,
Yeah.
Reza.
First of all, huge thank you to Al. I appreciate the creativity you're bringing to this, with not just exploring opportunities, but taking time to consult with others to make sure that. So thank you, and thank you to all of your teams for all the work. We started today's meeting talking about the dire needs of renovating our school facilities. And so I just want us to keep in the back of our minds as we're having this conversation that the vote for this bond is essential to the learning environment for our students, for thousands of students in our community. There are no easy solutions, right? We've got multiple competing priorities, including the values, including the cost, including the phasing and the planning. And so I think we're, as a board, as an administration, trying to weigh all those options. We appreciate your input. I do want to thank Vicki for your comments on the theme of collective interest. I was also struck in hearing some of those comments, and I just want to, again, invite us to lean into this we versus me. Chapel Hill Carbo is our community, and if we start to get so insular that we're like, I want what's best for my house, and so I will reject anything if it doesn't improve the benefits of just think about it. I know that's not the intention, and I know as a person who's advocated for my family, sometimes we can lean into that, but I'm just going to invite you to consider how it sounds to people when we say, I'm not going to vote for a bond that benefits the community if I don't get what I want. And I understand why you might say that, so I just wanted to lead with those comments. I agree with Barb that option 5 has a lot of good options. I do just want us to think through who's most impacted in that. We talked about walkability and reduced ride times. I want that for all of our families and students. My question that you don't have to answer right now, but I'd love to hear about is like, where do most of our native Spanish speakers live who attend FPG? I'd be really interested in how this will change their ride times, particularly what happens if they miss the bus to FPG and they now have to drive there. So, you know, that transportation. And I appreciate the point about, you know, Vicki made of like, how else might we support them in a transition like this? And then from a process perspective, I would like to ask administration to host a session at FPG including translators. We need to include considerations from that community in the way that we've heard the folks who can come out and be here with us. And so I just want to again say, let's just think about the impacts to all of our community members as we look at options.
Thanks, Ronnie. Meredith?
I'm not gonna take a ton of time because I feel like a lot of things, valuable input's already been kind of garnered here, but I think there are a few basic things that I'm hearing in a lot of questions that we receive via email and also a lot of the public comments that indicate to me that there's a lack of understanding in a large portion of our community about just certain things that I kind of had taken for granted. One, and I'm not sure if anybody's here that really wants to jump in and talk about this for even like 20 seconds, but addressing kind of the overarching purpose of dual language in general. And I don't think that consolidation has to be a part of this plan, but I understand the intent of why that was suggested. And I would just love it if, just for the benefit of the community, if somebody who feels equipped to explain kind of what consolidation might do for that community and that program, and then kind of why we have dual language to begin with. Because I just feel like a lot of people were referring to it as like this sort of vanity program, and that's really not what it is.
I can just kind of briefly share, we had a report that was done that's called the CAL report a few years ago, and then also a update for the board by Magnet Schools of America. So there have been studies done, particularly in our dual language program. And a couple of the things that were pointed out in the CAL report in particular talked about how we need to maximize our resources, particularly when it comes to vertical alignment. And they talked about how our dual language schools operated in isolation with little to no horizontal or vertical collaboration. They also talked about, which has been mentioned in public comments and emails, about each of our Spanish dual language programs operating their own school-based language allocation plan and having different models. The CAL report mentioned the lack of coordination and collaboration when it comes to curriculum documents, professional development plans, and these are all the things that we know are best practices when we're looking at any instructional program, not just dual language. They also referenced what research has shown about identifying, coordinating instruction across languages as being crucial to, excuse me, the purpose of the dual language program, which is what I'm getting at to answer your question of bilingualism and biliteracy. So those were some of the things that were mentioned, and it talked about a major concern being that because our programs were operating in isolation with little communication and collaboration, that this is leading to duplication of efforts and inefficiencies and sometimes causing low morale. I could go on and on, but that's kind of the gist of what those reports have said.
Okay. And maybe just a slight more specifically about like why we have a dual language program, like what type of student we're trying to reach and what benefit to them. You know, I understand like biliteracy and bilingualism, but just trying to, I'm trying to get at focusing on immigrants and people who really are in need of certain services that are provided.
Sure, so I'm gonna defer to George because I can answer that question, but he and I just had a conversation about this, about the history of our dual language programs and what the stated purpose was originally, and how that has, quite frankly, changed over time. And I know George loves to tell stories, but, not, you know what I mean by tell stories. Not those kind of stuff. But he and I had a great conversation just the other day because he did a deep dive into the history of the development of our dual language program. So not to put you on the spot, but would you like to,
Yeah, no, I
elaborate?
would. And you did put me on the spot. So in 2012, our community went through this big question of what is dual language and how does it best need to be structured? And this is all from the original source documents of the abstracts, not from hearsay and newspaper stories. And there was no dual language at the time at a magnet school like we have today at Frank Porter Graham. There were programs, there was a little program at Carver Elementary and at Scroggs at the time. And the purpose was clarified. And the purpose was to work, number one, with limited English proficient students. The feeling was we weren't doing them justice. In the programs we had, we needed to bring that group into a more intensive program. And the second purpose was to provide for non-English speaking students, and we're talking Spanish as the language right now. But there are other languages impacted in this time, was to boost their academic performance by bringing them into the program in a comprehensive, self-contained kind of program, intensive, whatever you want to call it. The third one then started to talk about developing students' understanding of culture and history and how the United States political system and government systems work. And there was a 5-point sort of tree that spread out, and it went down to developing well-rounded, informed students who can graduate from here and become productive members of society. So the target audience was pretty clear. And there were 5 programs proposed to the school board, 5 options during that year of 2012. 4 of them were supported by the community in all kinds of ways. The 5th one was supported by the administration, and the school board selected the 5th program. And with that was a magnet school at Frank Porter Graham with no consideration for walk zone priorities, and a program at Carver Elementary where they would expand each classroom 1 year at a time by grades. And so that's how we got here. Shortly after that happened, the school board, within literally 2 years of 2012, turned the purpose upside down. And the purpose of dual language then became, the major focus was well-rounded students who were bilingual, who could appreciate 2 cultures. And the LEP group, the Limited English Proficient group, and the non-English speaking groups, their priorities went to the bottom of the decision tree. It's quite a fascinating read. So we ended up with a program with 2 purposes. And that's kind of where we are today, 10 years. Did I hit the high points we talked about?
You did.
I really appreciate you indulging me on that. I just think it's important to have like a little background on dual language and why it is important. Whether or not that means we need to incorporate it as part of the bond, I'm gonna leave that up to.
Okay. I mean, and that was probably longer than you were expecting, Mary.
No, I mean, I think it was very helpful.
Can I add one point though? So, since I've been in, part of the district, but in May of 2021, the board implemented an enrollment cap in our dual language programs because we were having, long wait lists, for not just our Spanish speaking families, but also our, English dominant families. That was in May of 2021. In October of 2021, administration, we came back with a request for approval to exceed the enrollment cap because of those long wait lists. In June of this year, when our enrollment office completed the lottery process and provided a status update for our Rising Kindergarten lottery, Basically if you think about it as kind of 4 magnet programs with 3 schools, but 6 sections, because you're talking about Spanish speaking, English speaking, or Mandarin speaking and English speaking. Harborough Elementary was their dominant English speaker section is the only section at capacity with a pending wait list. The other ones do not have a wait list. So there was a point in time where there was discussion by this board that we talked about perhaps expanding our dual language program offerings, although our data at this point is now showing that to a certain degree, we don't have the need for expansion, but perhaps if there were some program improvements, then we would be able to do that as well.
We had a little brief digression there.
Yeah,
but
sorry.
We'll get back to the need for new facilities.
Like lead us off on
I'm
a
sort of
path,
with,
but I think it
yeah.
gives us a full picture of kind of this discussion, at least that piece of it. And then Al, I mean, thank you so much for all the slides. Super clear, super helpful. You know, I'm sure there are so many different permutations and combinations, and you know, you've been hearing from so many different people. So kudos to you for that. As far as a couple of like little specifics, I heard one comment that I had also seen an email about fixing schools versus brand new schools, and you kind of addressed that during the conversation, but can you just like give me a little snippet explaining why we need to focus on replacement of schools in most of these cases?
Yeah, so the Board of County Commissioners are using the Wolbert Plan. In the Wolbert Plan, they gave recommendations for both school districts to replace, in some cases, consolidate. You know, Orange County's got one where they say consolidate. They gave that recommendation, but then they also gave high priority projects, meaning if you only have money to do 6 schools in the entire county, you still have a portfolio of schools that you gotta do high priority maintenance. So the consultant came in and said, assessed our buildings and said, that roof needs to be replaced, we estimate, in the next 6 years. This roof could last 20 years, you're fine. This roof could be the next 2 years. So you've got all these high priority projects, as I mentioned, mechanical, electrical, things of that nature. What the county came back and said, though, when it comes to what they don't want is, in the word that I have to be careful in using, because for years I've said renovating schools. Renovating is not the word they really want to hear, because in their mind, renovating of a school, as the example that I showed, taking an older school that's undersized with classroom space, tearing down the walls, and say there's a row of classrooms, there's 5 of them. You take the walls down and you make 4 classrooms out of what today is 5, which means then you gotta either add an addition or something because you lose capacity because you're making the rooms bigger. They don't want us to do that. They want us to, because in their mind, old is old. And if you're gonna put 50–60% of the investment into a renovation when you could replace it and put our children in buildings that will not be replaced again for another 50 years, that's what they want to do. So when they say it's replacement, they want us to address educational adequacy and everything else by ultimately replacing. So they're not going to allow us, at least at this point, because again, their position could change over time too, but today, you just can't go in and renovate, like renovate bathrooms, renovate an office. You've got to be able to go in and do the projects that we've identified, or you're going to replace. So if there's a school that still has some life, they're going to say, you don't need to replace that because until these high priority projects are done and the school reaches a point, you would not replace it until that given point. Now, what I will say is over time, they're going to have to bring Wolbert back in, or somebody to come back and assess the buildings unless they hire a team on staff to conduct that work for facility planning to be able to reassess over time. You know, we'll know operationally what our buildings are doing or not doing, but that North Star that they've created with the plan is only good, but for so many years, and it projects out from a financial planning standpoint, but from a boost to the ground looking into the buildings, you're gonna have to reassess them every 3 to 5 years. You're gonna have to do that, but that's really about it's replacing versus just renovating. But again, I wanna make sure people understand, it's not that we're not gonna touch the buildings, because there are a lot of schools that are not being impacted at all, and they're not participating in any of these meetings, but I wanna make sure that we've got charts that show the types of projects that have been identified for them as well.
Thanks. I think that last point you made is really important for people to understand, and like a lot lot of the questions that I've gotten in conversations with people, they want very specific information about when this is happening, what's happening then, you know. And I've tried to stress, and I know that even James out of Bedford in her response to people who have been emailing her, that she's made a point of saying, whatever the plan is, we have to have something that's nimble, because we don't know if an HVAC is gonna blow at Ephesus tomorrow and create a huge problem. So, am I on the right track with like a?
You are, absolutely. That's why I keep talking about the need is greater than the means, which is life, right? But it's so true here, because just because we say that this roof needs to be done, we might find that something else occurs and another roof has to be put in front of it. But maybe Wolper did say that roof was high priority, but doggone it, it is high priority because something has happened. So that's why I'm so pleased that the county is giving us that ability to reassess, and that nimbleness that the chair has spoken about. That's a critical piece, because until we can get to the point to where more of our schools are in the average to good, we're gonna have to be nimble. We just have to be, in order to accomplish it, because again, there's just not enough money. You saw the amount that they identified, just for us. Take that and double it with Orange County. The county has got, or Orange County Schools, the county's got a tremendous burden that they have to fulfill, and that burden is on our taxpaying citizens. So they've got to try to be as smart and pragmatic, but also only do what they can do, because the public can only withstand but so much in tax increases. I mean, that's just life.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
I get the benefit of having already heard what everybody had to say, and I do agree with a lot of that stuff. I have one very specific question I'm gonna ask about option 5 in a minute, but I just wanna point out, we've had several discussions as we've gone across the table here about dual language and busing and changes and stuff. But all 5 of these things that we're considering, all of them are moving FPG up to Morris Grove, right? One of them is consolidating, but all 4 others are still moving FPG. So if we're talking about and wondering whether that's a bad idea for the dual language program, then we need another option. And otherwise, otherwise I feel like that conversation might, maybe it's not helpful for us trying to winnow down to a couple of choices. Now, I mean, like you said, we've looked at this many times now, and I get that one of our main constraints is that there's no land to build anywhere. That's why I don't have a big problem with having 2 elementary schools next to each other, because that's our only choice. If there was a big open spot of land in the middle of town, great. So I think we need to, think about, do we want to find out that more information and wonder if that's a possibility? Or are we just trying to winnow down from these 5, in which case, I'm not even sure we need to be discussing dual language, except whether we want to consolidate. Okay. So I'm just putting that out there. Okay, my question is really pedantic compared to that. Option 5, when we're doing the phase 1, the new school, Estes, gets built behind the old one. Now they've only got half the field of Phillips, okay? And then as soon as the kids move into that school, right, then they don't have any of the fields that they're using, right? And they won't have it, sorry.
Yes.
Right.
So when you build Estes,
Right.
while Estes is the new Estes is being
Yeah.
built,
Right.
at least 50% of that field will not be accessible.
Right.
When that school though is built and the children can occupy it,
Yeah.
until the time comes that funding is in a next referendum or whatever, to start Phillips,
Yeah.
that field, the remainder of that field would be accessible. It's only when you start the construction
Right.
that then the whole field,
Okay.
you got a school and
Okay,
you got
good.
construction right beside it.
So you got a half field, you can still do it for PE, but you can't have sporting events there.
As soon
Right.
as you break ground for the new Estes, the competitiveness of that field, the programming,
Yeah.
you lose that.
Right, I absolutely get that, and I feel like anybody would be willing to have that happen for a year or 2, but we're talking about maybe 10 years before Phillips might get built. And that's if we have another referendum pretty much right away after this one, So there's a good possibility that Phillips will not have their own football field for many years, right? I just wanna make sure that that's.
Well, what you see in option 5,
Yeah.
is obviously, we're looking to replace FPG.
Right.
Right now, we say that it's the only viable site that we have today
Yeah.
is the land that's adjacent, but we do want to replace it. But the idea is that Estes Hills would be replaced on the latter part of the referendum. So if you look at the financing, it would be in possibly year 7 or 8. So if you build it toward the end, again, this is aspirational, no one can
Right.
guarantee it, but you would hope that Phillips would be prioritized unless something else crazy happens. If you look at the report today, Phillips would be the first secondary school that you would recommend to be part of the next referendum. So, today I would say Phillips would be there. Just like I said in option 3, if we built Phillips first, I would be hedging and put in writing that it's the intent, if you would approve it, it's the intent that Estes Hills would be the next school in the next referendum.
Right.
So that it's documented, it's there at least, though being in a report doesn't mean that it's gonna happen. But I'd wanna set the stage for that. So,
Yeah.
so it would, hopefully that would minimize that time, because I agree with you. 3 years, 4 years, you just get a little uncomfortable, right? You
Right.
don't wanna, but if you did Estes Hills on the front end, yeah, if you don't have the funding for Phillips, then you're gonna wait until the next referendum, so there could be 7 to 8 years, and I think
Right.
that's programmatically, that's problematic. It'd be great if there was a field right across the street that you could just, potentially access or next to the property, but that's not the case, so you'll have to provide some type of alternate transportation services.
Right, right. Well, it also occurred to me, just looking at this, that the future site of the football field is mostly just the baseball field and some trees right now. I wonder if, as part of the earlier phase, if that field could go ahead and get built, and maybe as a multi-purpose field, that could be baseball and
Yeah,
football,
and
or something
that's-
along those lines.
That's part of the, as you get further in, if this was to be approved, the bond was approved, architect was hired, they start analyzing it, that's where that would work out. So what I'm trying to show is, I'm being conservative and saying, here's what I see as the worst case scenario, because I don't want anyone saying, Al Sharif, you didn't tell us. We voted on this and now you didn't tell us about that, so.
Right, right.
But yes, no, absolutely, potentially, now the catch there, will be accessibility issues potentially, but for the most part, no, you're right, it could be. They could
Yeah.
put that into a phasing. The challenge is, and I'm getting into the weeds here, but this is something we'll be experiencing over the next few years with school
Right.
construction. Contractors are gonna need to have an area to lay materials.
Yeah.
And we'll pay a premium if they have to park it somewhere 5 miles down the road or in Chatham County. So they're gonna wanna have some space that we're gonna have to try to provide. So there's some give and take pain points within the construction process. But Mr. Sharp, that's a very valued point that you make. Yeah.
Ronnie, you can be quick.
Yeah, I just want to respond to Mike's
Yeah, yeah.
question, which is, I'd love to think of as a next step, do we need another option? Have that conversation with FPG community, and then maybe continue to think about what schools might be options to minimize ride times. Like, I know we're now kind of talking about program implications, but none of these things can happen in isolation, right? And so I'd be interested to say, like, what are we hearing from those community members? And then might there be another option that situates this program in a school that minimizes the impact to those communities?
Quick.
You wrote it down.
We're coming back to you. I mean, I'm not cutting everybody off, but
I wrote it down.
I wanted to say a few
I
things
just-
to get us focused.
Yeah. I do wanna say that my support for option 5 is in no way influenced by the 2 sets of signs that have popped up around town recently. One of them urges community members to save Morris Grove. An earlier version objected to busing magnet kids into McDougal. And those signs, whether this was the intention or not, and whether they're representative of a broad swath of people or not, and I don't think they are, but they were, for me, a really uncomfortable reminder of the history in this district and districts throughout the South of resisting desegregation. And so this is really an echo of Vicki and Riza and Ronnie's points, but I do think it's important for us to commit to being part of one school district, invested in each other's successes, and I hope that's the spirit we'll go forward in. It's the right thing to do, and I also think it's the one that's most likely to ensure that we don't lose a national origin discrimination lawsuit. If it seems like we're moving away from dislodging McDougal and moving away from dislodging Morris Grove because we capitulated. Which is not, that is not what I am for, and I don't think that's what anybody up here is about, but I felt like I needed to put it on the record.
So, and I appreciate that. I was gonna say something not quite as clear as you did, Barb. Seriously. And to follow up with some of our colleagues have said is that our community has been incredibly engaged in this, and we value that, and we want that, and that's, we've been going on this now for 2 months in public meetings here. But I want to put Ronnie on the spot for a minute here. The Capital Needs Work Group has been in about 2 years ago. And Al, you've been here a couple of years? So this got started, this has been going on for several years, this discussion.
That's right. We started with the county commissioners, specifically Jane Hamilton leading the charge to really put together a process that would allow us to understand the needs collectively across, we are one of the, George mentioned earlier, districts in the state that have 2 school districts in a county. So the county is responsible for capital funding for both districts. And so historically, there's always been this tension of the county building needs, Orange County school needs, and Chapel Hill Carrboro needs. And this process that we followed over the past few years brought in these experts who looked at the school adequacy and really helped us think about a plan to collectively understand what the need was, then start to think about the funding. So this $300 million, while it sounds like a lot, really only gets us a very, a significant portion of the way, but there's still a number of outstanding needs that'll be remaining in both school districts. So this has been going on for a while. I'm excited about the fact that we're even here, we have a plan, we're talking about 3 schools. And so, yeah, I appreciate that opportunity to share that.
Thanks. And Al, my reference to you was, you've been doing this since the day you got here, I think. And we're very appreciative of that. And I brought this up in the context of engaging the community, and the community being engaged, and that is valuable. But what I've heard from my colleagues that bothered people, and it did me as well, is I would read these incredible letters with ideas and thoughts, and we get down to the end of it, and it says, if I don't get what I want, I'm not voting for the bond, and I'm gonna tell other people not to do that. And I just write and go, ugh. And we've got, and I'm talking hundreds of letters. We're receiving 25 to 50 emails a day for a month, and we're trying to at least send an acknowledgement to each one, and we're reading them, and we're listening. But the bottom line, and several people said, and I'm gonna say it to myself one more time before we get back to the weeds here a little bit, is without the bond passing on November 5th, everything we've done to date is out the window, and we don't need to talk anymore about new schools for the foreseeable future. It's really that simple. Now, we had a bond in 1997, we had one in 2001, and we had one in 2016. And the bond in 2001 and 1997 was for like $12 million. That's how much things have changed. And now at 2024, we have an opportunity. This is the biggest thing we've had, money-wise, and opportunity to build 3 new schools and to renovate 1 or 2 of our other schools. This is incredible, and when Ronnie gets excited, I'm like, yeah, I'm getting excited. And I want us to stay focused on that tonight as we narrow things down. And so I'm gonna say my last piece and then go back to my colleagues is, I favor some sort of option 5 with some modifications to it. And I would like us to get to somewhere tonight that we could put a plan out there and say, okay, we're gonna come back at the August meeting and vote on this plan. We're not voting on a plan tonight. Maybe there'll be 2 tonight. But I would like us to keep also thinking, we're talking about building Frank Porter Graham a new school building. We happen to have a magnet program at Frank Porter Graham called Dual Language, but we're not moving a dual language program anywhere. Right now, we have 1 piece of property in our district that we can use, Morris Grove, in the Morris Grove area. But I would like to suggest that, we propose something like we want to support option 5 with the provision that in the next 8 months, we will thoroughly examine, are there any other alternative geographic sites in Chapel Hill? Does somebody want to swap us property? Somebody want to donate us 15 acres down there on Franklin Street or whatever, and I'm not being facetious, but we can exhaust all possibilities. And you might say, well, I've already done that. That's fine. We need to share all that with the public. We do need to talk to Frank Porter Graham at length. about it, but we can still approve the concept for the bond of 3 new elementary schools. Here's the names, here's where they are, so that we can get something in front of the voters. And we gotta start talking about new buildings, new schools, and let's get on with it for the bond, knowing that we can make modifications down the road. So that's what I'm gonna push us towards tonight as I go to round 2, so to speak. Some variation of that. And with that said, I'm just gonna open the floor to the board to add to that, or say, yeah, let's move in that direction, or let's not. I wanna get a sense of where you guys wanna go, so we can get something done here.
Well, so,
Yeah.
Reese's point about why are we adding elementary seats? Like you said, Carborough would have 650 seats and so would Estes Hills. I guess it would be helpful to understand why. Like, why are we adding? Is it because down the line we're gonna subtract, or like, what's the thought process
That's
there?
exactly what it is. It's that if you, the goal is to put as many of our children in newest facilities.
Right.
And if the county and the budget will allow us to add 100 seats at our new schools, I'm going for it. Knowing that in the end, though, we have to make a commitment that something's gotta come offline. But it allows you, it gives you the ability, it gives you more wiggle room. And I will tell you, redistricting, we can look at capacity reports, but we all know from our experience, either firsthand or as board members, kids are not widgets and neighborhoods are not widgets. So when you have to redistrict and you have to bifurcate a neighborhood in some way, shape, or form, you have to cut it in 2. You wanna make sure that you've got a little wiggle room in your schools, a little flexibility, especially when it comes to specialty programming, such as EC, adaptive services, any type of occupational physical therapy. You just need that wiggle room, so it just helps. But that would be the goal, but ultimately in the end, and I cannot deny it, something has to come offline in the end. And at least what I've proposed in option 5, I believe it's at least the most sensible, pragmatic way, but ultimately, if we don't do that in the end, I think that we're not meeting the needs of what the county is asking, but at the same time, fiscally, we can only operate at this level, but for such a short period of time, and we gotta have a plan to do it. Because there are, just because the renovations cost capital, there is some operational savings that can be yielded from the closing of a school if you don't need it. You know, you're paying utilities, you're paying maintenance. Maintenance is local money. Your utilities is local money. Any inefficiencies with any staffing to where, you know, you're not taking someone's job away, but you're basically saying you don't need to have 2 people when you only need 1 because you've moved the kids. It's just where it makes sense. There's savings there. That's on the local end, which is where we have the greatest challenges. I have the least issues because when it comes to funding compared to what Mr. Scott has on the operational side, though I need more money, I'm able to get things done when I need to get them done. Scott's got to go through a lot more and able to do that because it's the operational side. The one thing I would ask, Mr. Chair, I'm hearing to look at, well, one, for us as a district to meet with the FPG community, to do it as you have asked. But I'm also here looking at some alternatives. And I know that those alternatives for FPG, we know we have the green track. It's right up the street from Morris Grove, though. So from a geographic standpoint, whatever we determine on where children are, it's not next to Morris Grove, but there is a site.
Well, and it would cost, right, because it's not yet ready.
Well, I'm just saying, that is a track, that is a site that's out there. The county is working through a community charrette process, primarily Rogers Road, Morris Grove. They've had recent meetings. They're looking at 3 to 4 years. So we know that that's there, but it's not indefinite, right? We don't know it yet. And we know how long, if you lived in this community, just from my own research, it's been 20, 25 years. We've been talking about the development of the green track. So I'm not gonna promise that. But where I need help tonight from a staffing perspective, and I asked this at the last meeting, if we're looking at trying to find alternate sites to replace FPG, the question for me is the dual language consolidation option. Any research that we do as a team, if that is it would benefit us. If that is something that we want to not consider or take off the table, it just allows us to focus on the options at play, because if not, our time is spent two different scenarios, and it's just very challenging. I'm not saying it can't do it, but it creates a lot of confusion, and if we have that ability, if you have consensus, we could it would help us if we got some clarity with that. And if we don't get it, we understand that, but it's a challenge managing the two, because the pros and the cons and everything is different. They're just so different when it comes to logistical planning.
All right, if I understand you correctly, and I'll let my colleagues get into this too. The bond is about building new schools. And that's why we got started in this. And we need a clear plan tonight to tell, no, not tonight, the final one, but we need to get focused here on, if you vote for the bond on November 5th, here's our plan. To give you these 3 new schools and this renovation at the middle schools. It has nothing to do with dual language. We could be talking about science. Programs happen to be, and one of the reasons we're here tonight is Frank Porter-Graham is dual language, but it's also the oldest school that needs to go and get a new school. Harbor Elementary is dual language, but it was supposed to get replaced in the last bond. And that was 8 years ago. And so it's coincidental. If dual language had been in 2 new buildings, we would not have any dual language discussion in the bond. And it got conflated in a good way for the right reasons, but I think we need to back it out and just focus on the bond and getting some new schools. Dual language may need to expand, or it may need to change its way, but that's up to the administration and the experts in the district to continue working and decide if you need to modify things. But it shouldn't affect the bond, and I want to get it out of the discussion, if my colleagues will tolerate it. And let us focus on what are the voters approving for the bond.
George, the only thing I'd say differently to that is
Yeah.
we have a unique opportunity while we're building to think about a programmatic impact. And so I don't know that I will die on the sword for keeping dual language in this, but I just think it's important to keep that in front of us. We've had this report for 10 years or so that said what needed to be done to support. We've not done that. And so, like, in my head, if there was an easy option that allowed us to do the dual language consolidation and build a building, that would be a no-brainer.
Well, okay, all right, I'll let you all have at it. I do want us to keep it clean. I think that's been part of the problem, has been people think we're putting a dual language in place of a new school, and we're making the kids at another school move forward. And that has just not helped us stay focused on selling the bond to the voters. And I think that should be a priority distinct from any program needs. And I really, you know, I was gonna make this presentation months ago, because I feel very strongly about it, that it's too confusing. We're confused sometimes, and we're here all the time with it. It's hard to have voters understand why we would want to do that. And I'm trying to bring some clarity here. Reese, I know you're trying to say something.
I know.
I'm sorry.
Barb, thank you for elevating the point I made about the capacity. I think SAPO caps us, so I think it's just a shift in capacity that I was suggesting with like a larger carpool, right? You know, because then it gives us some play with whatever we might do with other schools, with other decisions, dare I say, a program, George. Right?
Yes, you can say it.
So what I love about the footnote at the bottom of option 5 is order of events are subject to change. And if you notice, I have been careful, I've been talking about FPG, the school. I've tried to be very careful at the board meetings not talking about the program, because it brings out a side of the community I don't think they mean to be. Okay, let me say that. I don't think we mean to be that way, but that's how it comes off. So that's why I've been focusing on FPG, the facility. I don't love 2 schools being built beside each other from a facility standpoint, because that, for me, again, doesn't make sense. What I've been thinking about when I looked at this, and Alan and I chatted about it, is like, if we flip 6 through 9 steps in option 5, it gives the administration that time. And of course, this can happen at any point in time. but I'm focusing on buildings. We need to build a new FPG. And I get it, we don't wanna conflate the two, but I think Ronnie's point is, it's not a silo, unfortunately. You know, and George, you and I have talked about this. Unfortunately, we got painted in this corner a little bit by past board decisions. Here we are, 2011, 2012 board made these kind of decisions, and they were making decisions in a silo, right? They weren't thinking about, we're putting this program here, this old school and facilities, and that's why I try not to make decisions in a silo. Like, as I'm thinking about the decisions we're making, I'm thinking about big picture, long term. That's why I'm like, I just want to build new schools. That's why I would love to take that move next to Morris Grove Elementary off. And I feel like it gives staff time to think about where can they build a new school. So it gives them time, because I mean, the county's been working on this for 2 years. We've only been talking about it 2 months. This is not how you develop and build facilities that's gonna house between 500 and 650 kids. I mean, the professional job I do, it takes 2 years to develop and then start to build things that people don't even occupy. Like, people don't have to work and spend hours a day in the projects that I manage. So we're compressing a lot of assumptions that I don't love. And so that's why, I mean, I agree with George. I just want to build 3 schools. So striking off next to Morris Grove, no, take that off and give staff time to figure out where they're going to build this new FPG and run it to course, because they're going to need this time to work on, phase 1 ESA reviews, engineers and things like that, to figure out whatever the design is and what they're gonna do with it. They're gonna have to do that with Estes, right? I know you've talked to some people right now, but once people start really digging into things, they may say, oof, that's gonna be tough, right? We're gonna run into some challenges. It's not gonna be a 650 seat school. So, I mean, George, I think you want some direction. I think for me, I like 6 through 9.
So starting with build new SDs.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not influenced by the community, I'm just trying to think about it.
I just wanna make sure I'm looking at the same thing.
Yeah, and
How
I
many
don't,
seats? Is that 500 seats?
6.
6, I think.
600, and so then that could potentially become swing space also.
Right. It opens up some opportunity, right? Again, I don't love it. I've also, in my head, I've also played around with Phillips too in my head as I was sitting here, and I was like, the Phillips, the field, right, and all that stuff. I don't know. I'm not married to that. I think I would be more married to the whole option 5 if we take off, move next to Morris Grove Elementary School. I think talking to the FPG community, and I think the same way maybe Al, you've asked about building up and on that land at Estes, if we can think about Carrboro potentially land in a similar way, because it's really close to FPG. Not do language consolidation, but just from from a facility location standpoint. I don't know.
Well, I think what you're saying is, and that's another way of what I'm saying is, I would like to see us do something like, we're taking option 5A or whatever, and we're gonna build 3 new elementary schools
Yep.
and renovate the middle schools. And Frank Porter Graham is a to be determined, and if you wanna take the language off entirely of the site, until Al comes back in a year or 2 or half, whatever, and says, we've looked at every possible site, and it's this one, that's it. But we'd still be telling the voters, and we would be honest about it, that we're gonna build these 3 new schools. We just don't know tonight the order they're gonna be built.
Do we need 3 schools
We don't-
then?
Huh?
If we've got 600 seats at Estes and 600 seats at Carrboro,
I think that's the question, because I don't know if Al has looked into what I just said about building up at
Well,
Carrboro.
we're still gonna then we can pick another school
Right.
with the money if we don't, but we gotta get this bond passed, that's all.
No, I feel you, Ronnie. I mean,
No, I need clarification with the Carrboro. What you're asking, right now, what we're proposing for Carrboro is to build a structure that goes up because of the limited space because of the topography that's there.
Yeah.
What you're asking is, could you put FPG and Carborough together?
I'm not saying that, I'm
Okay,
just
I-
saying
I don't
build a
wanna-
bigger
I'm not
Carborough.
saying that.
Well, okay,
Could you do
So-
that?
to build a
So
bigger
the
Carborough.
challenge, and that's where I was, we've had people suggest that, the problem is, from a land perspective, you probably could build an 850 student structure, but from a vehicle infrastructure, I could never recommend it. And I would say, anybody, just if you've
So
never
we're
been to
back to
Carborough,
needing three
the
schools.
streets are residential streets, they can barely, they have challenges with the students that are there today, and to increase, to go beyond 600, 650, it just, I don't think it's just bad. The infrastructure's just not there, unfortunately, but at the same time, yeah, no. And I think that, at the same time, we have to be careful with adding capacity. The idea was originally in consolidation, you were using the existing capacity and you were taking a building down. But if you build, I would have more concerns of building a dual language school that has 850 kids in it. If anyone has concerns about in 25 years, what if that program doesn't exist anymore? I don't know what you would do with that at that point, because the way it would be designed as an elementary school, and you wouldn't be able to convert that to a middle school. You can go middle to elementary, but you can't go elementary to middle in the size. And then you'd have to supersize, so you build a middle school, elementary quasi building, and then it doesn't make, it's got the same challenges in trying to build a school unless you were committed that you're gonna do that forever, for the next 50 years. I just think that's a very unique building if you put it all together. Whereas when we looked at the McDougal option, you still had the ability, if the program was to decline, that could still be, it could revert back to a middle school. You had the ability, you had some flexibility because it was there, and ultimately you could do the same with the Estes Phillips design. You'd still have that kind of flexibility in the future for that. But I think that's the problem, the limitations that we have. It's the land availability, because for me to look for options to replace FPG, other than the green track, and if there's anything that the town of Carborough, Chapel Hill has that they're willing to do something with, the only way that we could make that happen would be you would have to close a school, tear it down, and build a new FPG on that old school site. You'd have to take a school out of the mix. I mean, that's the only other option. And I'm happy to come back to you and say, you take this school out, but all you're gonna do is you're just gonna, again, I don't know if that's the way to go as we're trying to simplify a process for a bond. You don't want that, right? Because you're just gonna have that community coming here and advocating just as other communities have. You're just gonna repeat that process,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
let's not get too much in the weeds about alternatives
Can we
tonight.
get rid of 2 and 2A?
Can we get rid of 2 and 2A? I'm good with that. Everybody else, okay? Everybody's nodding yes. We
It
got
just
rid
means
of 2 and 2A.
It just means we get rid of the idea of consolidating.
What?
It means we get rid of the idea of consolidating.
Or consolidating and dislodging?
And dislodging anybody, absolutely, yes. So we got rid of that. I'm trying to drive us to a variation of option 5, and then we'll sit on it till next
Does
month.
not mean it won't happen.
Yeah. What did you say?
I said potential reassignment now does not mean reassignment won't happen. I think that's what we have to
No,
keep
it
saying.
will
after-
happen. It has
It's not
happened.
it will re-happen, and so as much as people don't want it to happen, it will happen.
Although I think that's different from moving everybody out of McDougal and moving everybody into
Absolutely is.
McDougal from FPG, like
It
a
is.
one.
I mean, I think it's gonna happen with any school. I mean, if we have to shut down FPG, they're gonna have to be
Yeah.
100% displaced.
We're not gonna wholesale move a school of kids to get something new for somebody else. Is that what you're asking?
I think that's, I
That's
think
what
that's different
removing,
from what.
for clarification, that's what removing 2 or 2A, that's
Take 'em
what
off.
exactly what that would do.
That's right, take them off. That's, we've narrowed that down.
That's huge clarity for our team, thank you.
Perfect. All right, that's done.
Mhm.
All right,
All right, so, again, I always need clarity. What I'm gonna present back to you is basically option 5. I'm gonna remove next to Morris Grove, so that it's just to be determined, if you wanna call it that, but it'll be implied. But I'm gonna leave the order the way that it is, so that ultimately what I'm hearing you, Mr. Chair of the Board, say, FPG, Carborough, Estes Hills, today, the board is moving in that direction, that those are the 3 schools that are priority. How we go about the shape and the form of when we do it and all of that, that is still to be determined. But those are the priorities, so that, and then the high priority projects that we would be doing with the other schools, with Phillips and Colbert, that just gets put into the mix with the other schools, but that would not be taken off the table. They would still get roof work, HVAC work, the things that Wolpert identified as well. So it would be option 5, basically with the renewal of the next to Morris Grove in option 1. Then I'll remove all, so we have option 5, but we still have 3 and 3A? Or that would be the next
We're gonna take
conversation?
that off too, but I wanna see.
Okay.
One
Sorry,
question
I'm
at
getting
a
ahead,
time.
sorry.
Reasons, go ahead.
Because Estes and Phillips are co-located, and I know there was some question about fields and usage and laydown. For me, and because we have so much capacity at the elementary school, I think we need to also consider swapping out Estes and Phillips, right? Like the flexibility of the 2 of those, right?
What do you mean, swap?
Meaning,
Just kind of
it
do
could be
Phillips
either
first.
Estes or Phillips, right? Because they're co-located. And what does that look like? Because you're basically taking not just, and again, this is operational stuff, right? You're not just taking off an a middle school offline, but you're taking off all their athletics and everything, and that's gonna be another operational thing that we're gonna have to pay for too, right? Like to bridge it for some unknown time. And so doing that, we could be creating more financial situations for ourselves from a facility standpoint as well. So that's just something, I just want you to think about
Yeah,
that
so-
too.
So my initial response to that would be, if you do Estes and you don't do Phillips, but you take another school offline, the savings you're gonna get by taking that school offline, the transportation costs of transporting kids or having teachers at schools that have CDLs and do all that, I think by closing a school in the end, you're gonna save more money. And we could go through an exercise potentially to talk about that, but that would be the piece. The difference between if you decided to do option 3, where you do Phillips and not Estes, is you would have to reassign Estes sooner, just as we put into the plan. Whereas in the option 5, it would be after you build the school and then you move everybody at one time. There could be some multiple moves with option 3. Option 5, there would not be multiple moves. So it's a balance. I hear you. It's a balance between which one, and if you do the middle school first, you don't have the athletic field problem. Option 3, that's an advantage of option 3, which I don't show,
Yeah.
is that you don't have the athletic field problem with option 3.
Let me say, one, I appreciate the level of detail for the last 2 months, I really do. The county commissioners are not interested in how we're doing what we're doing.
Yeah.
Correct.
And the public's not real interested in how we're doing what we're doing yet, if they're not sure what we're doing. And so I think we need to be real clear tonight that our goal is to get the schools that are gonna be built in front of the voters. And here's the 3 schools we're gonna build, and here's the 2 we're gonna renovate. We have 2+ years to do all this design work if the bond is approved. No money is gonna start flowing till 2027. So if we approve the bond on November 5th, we still have time to decide if we need to do Estes Hills first, or we're back at Morris Grove, because that's the only property in town, and the voters wanna do it. But now what we're not gonna do is just reopen everything and come in and move a whole school of kids or anything. We're
Right.
committing to building these 3 schools. And that's what I think we need to say clear to people, and we're not committing it with the proviso that we're building this first or that second, but that's what's way ahead of where we need to be right now. That's what I would argue to everybody here, and I would like us just to get something clean, and then let it sit out there till August, the next board meeting. We're not final tonight, but here's what we're saying, and we'll come back and vote on it at the next board meeting. If it needed a minor tweak or something, that's okay. But we're not coming back to reopen the whole discussion again, unless there was something compelling that everybody thought, oh my God. Because we've been at it long enough, and we don't need to just keep trying to solve it all tonight, okay? So I'm looking to board, I'm seeing lots of heads nod.
Are you
Mike?
saying then, like, for the next time that we meet, and we're presenting basically 5 with the little changes?
Yes.
But you're saying don't have the steps of
No, we
what
can-
happens when, because I feel like,
Yeah, I don't.
I feel like the public is gonna want that to understand what's gonna happen for their family.
We can have
Right?
it in just as it is. I'm fine
Yeah,
with that.
okay, good.
Yes,
I mean, I get that our main thing
The
is
only
for
thing
the,
is we're
for
not
the
naming-
county,
yeah.
we need to name 3 schools.
yes.
But for our community, we need to tell them, here's our current plan for how we're gonna do that.
I'm
Okay,
absolutely
okay.
fine. I don't wanna
Yeah.
start tweaking it with options A, B, C, and D.
No,
That's all.
right, it sounded like you were saying
No,
to
I'm
get rid of
sorry.
the,
Thank
here's
you.
the
No,
steps.
thank you.
Okay,
I just wanted to be clear.
okay.
But as a matter of process, like I was compelled by Riza's idea about starting with 6, 7, 8, 9, and then do FPG after that, which I think is still 5. That's option 5.
That's still
But I think
5.
if we just keep option 5, that still gives us time to have the meeting.
I'm
With
fine with
FPG
option
folks.
5 as is. Risa wanted to drop the
Well-
Morris Grove name, site name. Otherwise, it's option 5,
I thought you were just saying put it at that.
right?
Yeah, I don't wanna rush this, George, and I hear your frustration, but this is a big, big decision for the district to make. And so I want us to spend as much time as we need going through it till we're comfortable with it. And so one of the things that, you know, that comes to my head is like the impact to FPG. Like, so for me, until we have that discussion with that community, I don't know that there's a whole lot more that I can, share as, you know, my options. I'm on, option 5 seems to make sense. I certainly wanna listen to that community in the way that we listen to everybody else. And if there's something meaningful that comes out of that, that pushes us in a different direction, I don't want us to be locked in to say we won't make any changes.
I'm with you. I don't have a problem with that. I just want, if we wanna just put option 5, is here's where we got to tonight, and we'll come back to it in August, I'm good with that, and that will give people. I don't have a, you know, I just wanna get us real focused, that's all, as much as we can. So I'm fine with going back to just let's adopt option 5.
After the conversation with FPG.
Well, then
we'll be
the
engaged.
implied is, yes, we'll go to FPG. If we need new information before August, if that's possible, I don't know what we're gonna get new. Can we do it? Well, let's do it. Can we talk to FPG more? Absolutely. We can also promise to build the new school. And we've got, like I say, we've got months ahead of us to say, sit down and say, how can we make this work? I mean, FPG needs a new school. We all agree to that. So we can vote to give them a new school without saying where it's gonna end up. And then talk to
Yeah,
them.
Yeah,
I think what I can come back with, is coming back with option 5. We don't really talk about, we'll have a process, that would get remove Morris Grove, but we can come back with information that says, here's any new information that we received, but here's the information we received after reaching out to the FPG community, so that that could be weighed in, so that you as a board can then look at option 5 to determine, based upon that feedback or any new information, how you might want to either adjust or do as Ms. Jenkins was suggesting, if it's switching 6 through 9 and doing that, but have the information, but leave it as it is, and that it could be more of a work session for you to receive that reflect upon that information, and then decide where you want to move from that point.
yeah. I'll just say, I don't love the idea of FPG being 7 years.
Okay. But is the board okay with us then adopting that when you'll bring back any additional information that you can learn? By the
No more
August.
option.
No more,
For the
no
next
more
meeting.
options. We're pushing all the other options off the table. We're focusing on option 5. We're trying to refine option 5 for possible adoption at the August meeting. If we don't get there, we don't get there.
I sort of feel like though this is a little bit like cart before the horse from a process perspective, because we heard every other community and adjusted options, and now we're saying this is our option, and we're going to this community who will be the most impacted and saying, take this option. So I'm just gonna encourage the board to continue to think about this community that is that has some of our most vulnerable children, and what that looks like and how that lines up with our values. So I'm not online to say this is our only option right now. Like, I want to have that conversation in a meaningful way with them and then come back. And we may end up in the same place, but I don't want to lock that in tonight.
I definitely hear that, and I agree with that. The only thing I would say is that what we've already said that we all agree with is that FPG needs a new building. That the current status quo of their building cannot stand. So I think we could agree on the fact that they need to be part of this plan without saying where it's gonna be and saying that it may be that Morris Grove, next to Morris Grove is the only place to put it. That might just be the reality, and then that's where what Vicky was saying will come into play. Then we'll have to figure out what resources are needed to get kids to school and make sure that they get there. There might be other options, but like, I don't necessarily think that we're saying different things, I guess. Like, I agree with you. I don't think we should put the cart before the horse. But I also think that we can probably go ahead and agree that FPG needs a new building. I mean,
Yes.
And Carver needs a new building,
yes,
and
yeah,
Estes Hills needs a new building.
Yeah.
And that's what we're asking the voters to approve. We've got plenty of time to get there.
Right,
Yeah.
that's what I'm saying.
People okay with that? So we're really approving option 5 with the understanding that we have a lot of.
That's not, no, that's, Robin doesn't wanna.
I
Are
think
you
it's
Robin,
just-
you wanna keep HOA on there too?
With the site being
No.
removed.
I'm okay to take those off.
But
schools
I'm
included
hearing
in option
administration
five.
say that that causes complexity for them, and so I would
Yeah.
want to take that
Okay,
off.
but
I don't
like,
love it, but I'm willing.
but not have it be like, here's the one thing,
That's right.
take it or leave it, yeah.
And I-
Option
and I-
5 is the only solution that remains. Correct.
No.
Option 5 is our lead option,
Correct.
maybe is a way to say
Yeah.
it, and we wanna hear from our FPG community.
Correct, but for the public's sake, you do not want to see option 2, 2A, 3, 3A. You want to see just the components of option 5, but how that's going to be determined is to be determined, with feedback from the community, as well as any additional information that we can uncover and bring back to you. Okay.
I was just thinking about the community input piece, and I think I'm tracking with you, Ronnie. So many people know, particularly folks in this room and others who have emailed, Al and Andy have given the courtesy to the McDougal community, the Estes community, the Morris Grove community, met with PTA leaders, school leaders, you know, small groups of folks, certainly who have received input from the broader community. So at minimum, even though we have these other community meetings off-site, not in schools planned, I think we do owe it to the FPG community, albeit with limited options. Before those other conversations, there were many options on the table at the time. So if we could say this is the lead option and they can give the same courtesy to the FPG community, I think that would be appreciated.
And Carrboro. I mean, I feel like we keep leaving them out of the discussion. And
Except they're not
They're
moving
not-
offline,
Right.
and they're
Yeah.
not moving across the.
I've actually had communication with
Yeah.
the new principal,
Okay.
and the PTA has asked me to come in September from what they've reviewed, so I
And I met with their staff in May.
met with staff.
Okay? I mean, that all makes sense to me. I'm afraid to use the word option 5 again.
We can talk about it as the lead option.
So for clarity though, I think we're at a point where I could take option 5 off and just say this is kind of
This is the plan.
the idea, what the proposal or idea, but so that we just get out of the numbers, knowing if that's where we are, then you're gonna modify it from that. So that's it's a good time to hit a reset, so that people aren't
This is our
tracking.
reset.
And we can add that to the abstract for people who've been tracking multiple meetings and all that.
So you're coming back with the 3 schools, and we're gonna talk to the Frank Porter Graham community, certainly, and this is the essence of the plan, and we'll call it the plan.
The lead option.
The lead option.
But when we're talking to them, we're not like getting approval from them about it. We really want their input about the possible ways that their building could be replaced, right?
And what
Because-
they need.
Right,
Correct.
what they need, how they feel they would be impacted, how do they feel about, do you think that you would still go if it was, you know, on the north side of town?
Right.
We're getting input from them about that it's still up in the air where FPG could land, but we're going to
We need to
replace
replace your
FPG.
school.
Right,
Yeah.
right, so we're not just saying, here's the plan, are y'all okay with it?
Right,
We want them
That's right.
involved in
that's right.
the steps, okay.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we may, I mean, I know we're not entertaining, we narrowed it down to a lead option. But we may have to bring our whole community along. I mean, I think people have shared, you're right. I mean, all this came about at the end of the school year when people were probably focused on everything else. So you may have to bring them along about, these were the options, these are the reasons why. Obviously, FPG stayed at the top of it, needed a new building, just so they don't feel like what Ronnie's saying, this is our thing, yes or no.
Correct. Yeah.
And I would be prepared, you know, we heard a couple times in emails and questions, like, why couldn't we rebuild on an FPG site? And I know you've done a lot of analysis on that, so just maybe be prepared for that question.
Okay? Yeah.
May I just wanna make sure the information that is needed for the bond for the county to be able to move its bond forward is essentially, with this money, the school system will replace XYZ schools, is that correct? They don't necessarily need in which order.
So, I think that the fact that it's 3 elementary schools, from a funding standpoint, it's not as if they were planning to do one school in 1 year, then year 3, and then year 6. It's not like you got a middle school and an elementary school in their they're planning with the debt service. So if it's an elementary school for an elementary school, and they were to swap out in their mind, I don't think it matters from a financial standpoint. But what they're going to want to hear from us is, what are the 3 schools? What are the schools that your board has determined, so that could be part of the education, bond education, that are the highest priority? Now, ultimately, when we go out and present, they're going to want to. They would love for us to be able to say, this is the timeline, because that's what a lot of people want to know, because they want to know when could their child be impacted or not. So they would want that ultimately, but I think from a CIP, the amendment, they need to know the schools.
Okay, so is it possible for the board to decide that you want to replace these 3 elementary schools, and those are your high priority sites, and would that help with the specific ballot information that you need?
So it would help with the bond education, but the ballot it does not indicate any schools
Right.
in the county. It just says the amount, you support schools in this amount.
Okay.
But for the
I guess
planning
it would help
perspective, they
with
want to be able to.
the county's
do the same.
financial plan.
Yes, the budget office would want to know, okay, Al, he's gonna come back to me and say, what are the 3 schools? And I'll say there are 3 elementary to be determined, because they still have to figure out the financing of when they're gonna sequence it with whatever Orange County decides, because they're doing the same thing our board is doing.
Has the board yet approved the concept that what we want to do with this money is 3 elementary schools?
Well, that's
This
where
board
we're
has-
at.
Okay.
We have not finally approved that yet. And that's
Would
why
it
we're,
help to say that tonight, that we
Well,
want
that's
to do
what I'm
3
trying to say
elementary
tonight.
schools?
Yeah.
And we have not yet decided in what order.
yeah. That's
Okay.
what, but we're
Without
gonna
talking to the
finalize
county,
it
I think
in
that would be
August.
helpful.
We told people we weren't gonna make a final tonight.
So that's where we end with option 5 is our lead 5. That's what option 5 essentially says.
Okay.
But the official vote wouldn't be until August.
Yeah, okay.
We're not
I'm
on-
sorry if I
No, you have, that's fine.
derailed.
We're
I
not
just
under
want to
the
make sure
time.
they have what they need for this.
Well, we can do this in August. We're not under that time deadline
Correct.
from the county that, we can do this in August and still be official with the county.
As of this morning, the county believes that as you communicated, that your goal is to take a vote at the August 15th, I believe that's the date, that meeting.
Right.
At the earliest.
Right.
And they're prepared for that. So they don't need anything tonight, but I think that if that's where we're headed, that helps them, because they've got work on their end too. So
Yeah.
I think you're in a very good spot right now in the process.
Okay, so we're here?
Anything else?
I'm not gonna use any other words, 'cause I'm pleased, I'm sorry that it's taken so long for everybody, but at the same time, I'm just pleased that we're taking the time we said we would to get this right. I mean, I know it's late and people are tired of talking about it. That's the way it works. You didn't have to say yes. Okay, Al, you're clear what we're gonna do?
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board.
I can't thank you enough. Thank you very much. Board members, we're gonna end this topic, if you're okay for tonight, and move on to our next topic.
I hope community members